At this moment, both cultivators and void warriors were barely able to resist the terrifying dark astral wind. Void God looked at devouring emperor beside him with a complicated look in his eyes, but he suppressed it. The terrifying divine punishment from the falling stars chess game poured down on Old Master. These barriers formed by the black water could no longer block the boundless divine might. All light and darkness in sight were swallowed. Jian Wushuang's heart trembled, and he immediately moved to help Old Master. Feng Qi pulled him back and said anxiously, "Do you want to die? You can't change anything even if you go over there." Jian Wushuang knew what Feng Qi meant, but he and Old Master had been going through life and death together these days, and their relationship had long gone far beyond ordinary. He was ready to go to Old Master's aid at any cost. Crack, a clear cracking sound came from the center of the divine punishment. Then, a huge arm that was like a galaxy broke the divine punishment and smashed toward devouring Emperor and Void God. The two people's gazes focused, and they each raised their hands to block. Under the attack of this galaxy-like arm, even Ancestor Realm experts were forced back millions of miles. The dark void was shattered to the point that it could not be shattered anymore, and the dark matter that was released filled every inch of space. Seeing this, Devour One, who was recovering from his injuries, hurried to devouring Emperor. The huge galaxy arm that forced the two Ancestor Realm experts to retreat slowly retracted. At the same time, the huge palm clenched and directly tore the falling star chessboard into pieces. Old Master's figure stood proudly on his own, and the majestic black water phantom behind him slowly opened its eyes. Their gazes were like two long black rivers that stretched across the ages. The vast and barren aura made everyone feel tiny, like a grain of sand in the great desert. At this moment, even the mysterious and calm devouring emperor could not remain calm. Void God was shocked and immediately released his natal ancestral form. A demon god that seemed to have awakened from an unknown ancient time sat up from the darkness, and his eyes were as large as the star field. At the same time, 6 ancient chains with scarlet runes were bound to the demon god's body. They were extremely ferocious. This demon god that seemed to be bound by the laws of the heavenly Tao was Void God's ancestral form. Extremely evil black flames shot out of the demon god's mouth, which was full of fangs, and collided with the black river. Devour One also clenched his teeth and jumped up. The remaining 3 arms of laws behind him turned into huge spears and thrust out. The off-world battlefield was the place with the weakest and most chaotic laws in the universe. It simply could not withstand the combined attack of 3 Tao ancestors. The space of the entire battlefield started to collapse. The 3 Ancestor Realm attacks finally stopped Old Master's endless attack. The shock waves turned into waves of ripples that shook the 9 heavens and 10 lands. Devour One took a few steps back and spat out a mouthful of divine blood. The arms of laws behind him were completely shattered. The phantom form behind Void God also cracked. Emperor Devourer raised his hand and took back the black gold imperial crown. His face finally turned serious. Old Master's strength had clearly exceeded their expectations. For a moment, the 3 Ancestor Realm experts did not dare to act rashly. Old Master was just like before, as if he had not been injured from the beginning to the end. Jian Wushuang, who was below, raised the corners of his mouth slightly and raised the Tarot Divine sword high. Fight! Brilliant divine power rose to the sky. Jian Wushuang turned his body into a sword Dao and swept across the battlefield. The army of more than 3 million cultivators once again charged at the army of void warriors. If it was not for the off-world battlefield, there probably would not be any star field that could support such a terrifying war. The 2-in-1/2 ancestor, who had been almost killed by Jian Wushuang in the previous battle, were now facing Jian Wushuang with hatred. The Tarot Divine sword slashed out, but the sword light was strangely absorbed. At the same time, the in-1/2 ancestor shook his arms in the air and an invisible boundary directly covered Jian Wushuang. This time, "I'll take your life." He was completely mad, and he kept screaming. Jian Wushuang was not afraid at all. The Tarot Divine sword released a burning divine light. "If you have the guts, come and take it." As the divine power and void power interweaved, Broken corpses were laid out in the void. Above the broken sky, Devour One, the weakest ancestor realm expert, was already at a disadvantage in this terrible confrontation. The wound on his abdomen that was about to heal showed signs of tearing again. Void God sensed that the ancestral form behind him had been shattered to a certain extent and finally stopped. "You don't belong to the divine power universe," Void God said as he looked at the old man. "So what?" Old Master asked. Void took a deep breath and said, "Since you don't belong to the divine power universe, join my Void universe. I can agree to all your conditions." "Is that so?" Old Master leaned forward slightly, his eyes slightly open. "You can agree to any condition?" Void God nodded. "Any condition? Then what if I want you all to die?" Old Master's eyes suddenly opened wide, and indescribable energy spewed out of his palm, turning into thousands of black ribbons that bound Void God. "You're looking for death." The ancestral phantom form of the demon god behind him suddenly broke free from the chains on his left arm and smashed toward Old Master. Emperor Devourer and Devour One looked at each other, and they both moved their bodies to face the old man. The demon god ancestral phantom form's huge arm smashed through nearly 100 black ribbons and pressed down on Old Master. However, the illusionary black waterfall was like a living thing. It was smashed and continuously emerged. The ancestral phantom form of the demon god roared in anger, but it was surrounded in an extremely short time. Old Master waved his arms and slowly trapped Void God. Void God could feel a strange energy rapidly devouring his void power, and he could not help but be shocked. Just as he was about to self-destruct his ancestral phantom, Void God suddenly felt a chill behind him. He turned around subconsciously. Devour One had already jumped high, and the most terrifying power burst out of his hand. It did not go to Old Master, but to his back. Void God's heart trembled, and his cold and majestic expression reappeared. He used all his strength, and the huge ancestral form of the demon god behind him finally broke free from the tens of thousands of black ribbons. Then, his heavenly arm directly grabbed Devour One, who was shooting at him. Devour One, who was about to deliver a fatal blow to Void God, was instead controlled by the demon god's ancestral phantom form. He did not have time to react at all, and he was thrown at Old Master. "No?" Grabbing Devour One's neck with his palm, Old Master smiled faintly. His black eyes seemed to have an irresistible force that began to consume Devour One's mind. The endless reincarnation, the desolation where even time was meaningless, and the sadness of the ancient times were like chains that dragged Devour into the eternal dark abyss. There was only fear left in Devour One's eyes. His red eyes started to dim, and his ancestor-level power was quickly dissipating. Everything in the world, including the laws of the great Tao, sank into his pitch-black eyes. Devour One, who was at the peak of the universe, the master of laws, the real ancestor-level expert, had died just like that. The demonic god phantom form behind Void God was completely shattered. He had clearly suffered heavy injuries. He suppressed the anger in his heart and looked at Devouring Emperor. Devouring Emperor's eyes were calm. He said indifferently, "Devour One went too far. He deserves to die." Void God snorted and did not say anything else. The current situation was urgent, and if they were to fall out with each other, it would only cause the virtual universe to fall into a passive state. "Leave the rest to me," Devouring Emperor suddenly said as he slowly walked toward Old Master. His black and gold robe fluttered even though there was no wind, and a strange energy fluctuation was spreading out from his body. This kind of energy fluctuation seemed out of place in both the Void universe and the Divine Power universe. "You and I are the same. We don't belong to these two universes, right?" Devouring Emperor said calmly. Old Master did not speak. "I think you realized it when you first saw me, right? If that's the case, why don't we join forces?" Devouring Emperor continued. "You? Are you even worthy?" Old Master finally spoke, his words full of disdain. Devouring Emperor's pupils suddenly narrowed, and he smashed Old Master with extreme force. The power that was enough to overturn any star field or divine kingdom withered and disappeared when it touched Old Master. Old Master was filled with killing intent. Countless black water ripples spread out with him as the center. There was only one person who knew his secret, and it could only be one person. The others had to die. Devouring Emperor stepped back and released an aura that was beyond the ancestor level. The two forces that transcended the laws of the universe collided with each other, and even Void God felt a lingering fear. Could it be that what he said was true? That's where the final realm of Tao vindication is. Void God's eyes were solemn. At the same time, he looked at the battlefield below him. There, Jian Wushuang, who was like a god, had divine patterns all over his body. He held the Tarot Divine Sword in his left hand and a half-ancestor-level Void Master's head in his right hand. The two of them looked at each other from a distance. At this moment, even Void God felt a little uncomfortable. It was as if he had been intimidated by an ant. The corners of Jian Wushuang's mouth curled up slightly. After he smashed the head in his right hand into a bloody mist, he rushed into the army of Void Warriors again. All kinds of six-scar Void Masters and even half-ancestor-level experts were annihilated by Jian Wushuang. His divine blood had almost dyed his robe. He was like a god of death, and no one could stop him. Even the Devourers had lost 4 members because of Jian Wushuang. Under the leadership of Jian Wushuang and the 7 half-ancestors, the Divine Power Universe gradually reversed the situation and began to devour the army of Void Warriors. In the sky, Void God was furious. He faced the army of cultivators and sent down divine punishment. The most terrifying thing about the Ancestor Realm was that everyone below the Ancestor Realm was like an ant. Even 10,000 peak half-ancestors could not cause any damage to an Ancestor Realm expert. Jian Wushuang had no time to stop it. The attack of Void God hit the front of the army of cultivators. Xianxia, Xianghuang, the 2 half-ancestors, Tianyi, the Golden Crow Emperor, and nearly 100 other invincible supremes were all turned into dust before they could even dodge. Void God, you deserve to die. Jian Wushuang's eyes almost popped out. With that, the Star River Lake Sea Sword Intent turned into a long river of sword intent and rose against the sky. Void God looked disdainful. With a wave of his hand, he destroyed the river of sword intent. But at the same time, he had a strange expression on his face. That was because he felt a slight stabbing pain in his arm when he destroyed the river of sword intent. How is this possible? How can a trifling invincible supreme make me feel so uneasy? He stopped thinking about it. Just as Void God was about to kill Jian Wushuang, the battlefield in the sky changed. Devouring Emperor was forced back. The strange energy around him started to disperse. Looking at the battered Devouring Emperor and Old Master, who was filled with killing intent, Void God summoned the ancestral form of the demon god. Old Master with the black water phantom image pressed down. Devouring Emperor and Void God looked at each other and blocked the attack together. It was as if he was carrying all the stars and realms on his shoulders. The moment the demon god phantom image behind Void God crashed into Old Master, it began to show signs of cracking. Devouring Emperor was the same, with blue veins popping up on his face. Void God had never been as shocked as he was today. This strange-looking old man was actually so terrifying that even the 3 ancestor-level experts could not cause him any harm. Just as Void God felt that his divine body was about to collapse, Devouring Emperor's deep voice rang out. You've hidden yourself well, but the power you use today has long surpassed the scope of this universe. Do you think they won't be able to track you down? At that time, everything you have will be for naught. It was a short sentence, but it had a huge effect. Void God only felt the black water phantom image on his body stop for a moment. In the next moment, Devouring Emperor sneered coldly. An image of Old Master appeared behind him, and with infinite power, it suddenly shot into the body of the real Old Master. Everything happened in the blink of an eye, so fast that Old Master could only react. Time seemed to have stopped, and the black water phantom image behind Old Master began to collapse inch by inch. At the same time, Old Master's skin, which was the boundary between young and old, began to be covered with cobweb-like ravines. Old Master did not say anything else. He wanted to crush Devouring Emperor into powder, but he could not even lift his hand. Devouring Emperor smiled coldly and majestically. At the same time, figures of old masters walked out from behind him one after another. Finally, it stopped at 7. The 7 old masters looked at the real old master with cold expressions. "You will never win against me, even if it's in this land." The 7 old masters spoke at the same time. "Now let me devour you." The ultimate darkness descended, and even the void was about to be devoured. Devouring Emperor, along with the 7 old masters behind him, flew toward the real old master. However, in the next moment, a brilliant divine pattern shot up into the sky, breaking through the darkness with divine might. Covered in blood, Jian Wushuang appeared in front of Old Master and pointed the tarot divine sword at Devouring Emperor. "You despicable man!" Devouring Emperor's face darkened and he was about to kill Jian Wushuang. The attack of Void God went past Devouring Emperor and hit Jian Wushuang. The void collapsed. It was almost the full power attack of Void God. It hit Jian Wushuang right in front of him and exploded in the most tragic way. Anyone who was close to the center of the explosion was dead. The heavens and earth wailed as the tragic explosion destroyed the battlefield. Everything was destroyed. The entire sky was devoured by the extremely bright light produced by the explosion, and even Devouring Emperor subconsciously covered his face. This indescribable extreme brightness lasted for nearly half a cup of tea's time. Without waiting for the dazzling polar day to dissipate, Devouring Emperor hurriedly looked at the center of the explosion. However, there were no remains or broken arms except for the void. "Where are the 2 of them?" Devouring Emperor asked in a deep voice while his endless power pressed down on Void God. Void God did not show any weakness. His peak void power rose. "Do you think that I can't kill him by myself?" Suppressing his anger and urge to kill Void God, Devouring Emperor moved his body to the center of the explosion to check. Impossible! Did he really die? Devouring Emperor was shocked, but Void God's attack was too terrifying. Old Master was also seriously injured by the attack, so it was hard for him to survive. Thinking of this, Devouring Emperor suppressed the anger and suspicion in his heart. He did not even look at Void God, but looked down. There was an army of nearly 3 million cultivators from the divine power universes there. "I don't care if he's dead or not. The ones who should die now are you ants." Devouring Emperor was like the real decision-maker. He passed Void God and gave the order, "Kill them all. Leave no one alive." The army of Void warriors hesitated for a moment. Then, under the leadership of several half-ancestors of the Devourers, they rushed toward the Divine Power Universe army. Taking a deep breath, Void God said in a low voice, "Devouring Emperor, you've crossed the line." When Devouring Emperor heard this, he sneered. "It's just an order from a universe, and you're so concerned about it? Don't you forget your promise." Hatred flashed in the depths of his eyes. Void God did not speak again. He controlled the demon god ancestral phantom form behind him to attack the Divine Power Universe army. Jian Wushuang and the only Ancestor Realm expert in the Divine Power Universe had died. All the cultivators in the Divine Power Universe looked at the scene in shock. Without Jian Wushuang, who had entered the Sword Dao with his own body and swept through the army of void warriors as if he had entered no man's land, all the cultivators almost instantly lost their benchmark and hope. The terrifying ancestral demon god's phantom image had wiped out an army of over 200,000 cultivators and countless Supreme Realm experts. The Golden Crow clan, the Great Void Temple, and all the disciples of the 9 Emperor Pavilion who had come to help had all died. Not a single one survived. Just as Supreme ZFA and Supreme Honger were about to die, they looked at the place where Jian Wushuang had died with a smile in their eyes. After gently muttering, "Take care, my young friend," they calmly met their deaths. The Starry Sky Sword Sex Foundation had been destroyed, leaving only Wu Jianxian and a few others who barely managed to escape the disaster. The Dragon, Phoenix, and Qilin clans were also severely injured. After Emperor Devourer joined the massacre, the great army of the Divine Power Universe was annihilated. Even a half-ancestor would not be able to put up any resistance. Lung Rushuang's face was pale as she looked at the destructive aura calmly. Swish, a phoenix extended its huge wings and blocked Lung Rushuang's path, as well as the aftermath of the Ancestor Realm attack. Feng Qi let out a miserable cry, and her original phoenix form was extinguished. She turned back into his human form and fell down. Lung Rushuang hurriedly reached out to catch Feng Qi. The left half of Feng Qi's body was broken and bleeding. Matriarch! More than 200 phoenixes tried to save Feng Qi, but they were all killed by Devouring Emperor with a wave of his hand. Out of the 3 million-strong cultivator army, only 1 million remained. The Void Universe went completely crazy. Every Void Warrior was like a bloodthirsty demon, rapidly consuming the life of the Divine Power Universe. Supreme Shui Bo seemed to have aged 10 times in an instant as he watched this battle, which was almost certain to end. The words that were most difficult to say were finally uttered. All soldiers of the Divine Power Universe, retreat. Save the last flame for the last time. Every cultivator's face was deathly pale. After this defeat, the Divine Power Universe would be completely destroyed. No one would be able to stop the Void Universe. Leave this place to me. Supreme Shui Bo's long robe fluttered in the wind. There was no fear on his face, only indifference after seeing through the profound meaning of life. One of the snowflake swords had been shattered. The old beggar poured the last mouthful of wine into his throat with a slightly tipsy face and entered the half-ancestor realm. He, who had been silent and wandering his entire life, had finally gained enlightenment in this final battle. A brilliant and majestic half-ancestor divine power emerged, and the old beggar dressed as a sloppy Taoist disappeared. In his place was a young swordsman with sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. The Divine Power Universe can't be left without guidance. I'll leave that to you. The old beggar who looked like a young swordsman laughed. I've lived for so long. It's time to find a place to rest. The blood-stained dragon Emperor Linhe also stepped forward and said, Leave this place to us. Elder Shui Bo, please take good care of the Divine Power Universe. Long Yen and Long Qi held back Supreme Shui Bo. Let's go. An unparalleled void power descended, and the old beggar laughed out loud. An unruly swordsman in green robes transformed his body into sword intent, and like a long river, he rose against the heavens. The old beggar had sacrificed himself to destroy Void God's attack. The sword intent dissipated like a star waterfall, and the Divine Power Universe also lost a half-ancestor expert. Under the old beggar's attack, all the Void Masters who had crossed the sword waterfall were killed. Even the half-ancestors had to avoid the attack, buying time for the Divine Power Universe army to retreat. At this moment, the Dragon Emperor Linhe was the only one left on the shattered battlefield. He stood firmly in the distance, looking at the cultivator who was only at the peak of the half-ancestor realm. Without thinking, Devouring Emperor unleashed a palm strike to kill him. However, the descending palm strike could not move an inch forward. Devouring Emperor's eyes narrowed, and a terrifying aura surged. A white-bone dragon claw grabbed Devouring Emperor's palm attack and tore it into pieces. Each bone was as large as a star field, and they emerged from Dragon Emperor Linhe's body. The sun-like eye sockets shot out a majestic light. Dragon Emperor Linhe's expression was calm, but his clear eyes were gradually turning cloudy. He transformed into his scarlet natal ancestral dragon. The two giant dragons, one gold and one bone, became the last line of defense and defended this place to the death. The first generation of the Dragon Clan's ancestral dragon, as well as the Dragon Emperor, had both fallen on the off-world battlefield. Devouring Emperor and Void God were injured, and the army of the Void Universe had lost nearly 800,000 soldiers. Countless corpses filled the void that had turned into nothingness again, and countless divine blood and broken pieces of magic treasures gathered to form a winding river. This battle of catastrophe was far from over. No one knew when it would end, but it would definitely end with the complete destruction of a universe. Jade ornaments clanked in her torn clothes, and a slender green lotus whose roots had turned into green jade slowly fell into the bottomless abyss with its master. Every drop of the divine blood that contained great power fell into the void, like leaves returning to the earth. Everything was like a bizarre dream, falling into eternal oblivion. However, in this dreamlike darkness filled with unknown dark matter, an extremely pure golden light broke through the chaos. Why are there two people here? A doubtful yet authoritative voice rang out, and everything returned to silence. After a long time, the figure who should have died in the hands of Void God, but had somehow survived, slowly opened his eyes. He only felt that his surroundings were bright and clear, and he could hear the soft sound of a breeze blowing past bamboo. Didn't I die? Is this the reincarnation realm? Could it be that even if a god dies, there will be reincarnation? Sitting up slowly from the bamboo bed, Jian Wushuang did not have time to think about any problems before he was interrupted by the sharp pain coming from his body. I can still feel pain when I'm dead? Could it be that I'm not dead? Jian Wushuang murmured softly. He quickly stabilized his heart and carefully checked the meridians in his body. After checking, he realized that he was not dead. Other than the broken meridians in his body, even his divine power was slowly going through a cycle of being reborn and destroyed. I didn't die? I actually didn't die. The uncontrollable ecstasy made Jian Wushuang forget the pain in his body. It was not until he had calmed down for a long time that he started to look around the room. The interior of the room was extremely simple. Every piece of furniture, window decorations, and even the house was made of bamboo. From the degree of roughness, it seemed that the owner had woven it by hand. Enduring the pain, Jian Wushuang walked out of the room barefooted. Outside the room, the warm and genial sunlight shone on his face. The two sides of the small room were planted with bamboo gardens. In front of him was a vast plain. Looking at the fairyland-like environment in front of him, Jian Wushuang completely let down his guard. It had been tens of thousands of years, and he had never enjoyed a moment of relaxation. However, he only relaxed for a moment before all the questions came back to his mind. The brutal battlefield of blood and fire, the army of 1 million divine power universe cultivators, and the heavily injured old master were like sharp knives cutting at his body. He quickly pushed the door open and entered. Only then did he let out a slight sigh of relief. Inside the room, old master was lying on the ground. His aura was calm and he had passed the critical period. However, the dark green patterns on his skin had not disappeared. Without any hesitation, Jian Wushuang sat in front of the bed and extended his hand to transfer the divine power that was circulating in his body into old master's body. When the divine power entered his body, it was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no trace of it at all. However, Jian Wushuang seemed to be sitting still, and he just continued to transfer divine power into old master's body. This continued for many years, and the sun in the sky never rose or fell. Everything was the same, until a slight fluctuation was emitted from this continent. Slowly opening his eyes, Jian Wushuang walked out of the bamboo house as if he had realized something. From the distant horizon, a gap appeared in the space, and countless figures arrived on this continent. Looking at the familiar figures and divine power, Jian Wushuang could no longer suppress his emotions, and he leaped forward. Supreme Shuebo, who was covered in blood, was already at the end of his rope in terms of both his divine body and consciousness. Beside him, Ninth Culpa King's usual white robe was blood red. White Ape, Long Yen, Long Qi, Wu Jianxian, Great Void Divine Emperor, and the others were also in the same state. There was no light in the eyes of the army of cultivators, which numbered less than 1 million. Only the Qilin clan, which had suffered heavy casualties, had a look of excitement on their faces. Jian Wushuang, who was only wearing plain clothes, appeared in front of everyone in an instant. Supreme Shuebo smiled and said slowly, "Palace Master Wushuang, I've come to see you." With that, Shuebo passed out. Jian Wushuang hurriedly moved his body to support Supreme Shui. Wu Jianxian widened his eyes and said in disbelief, "Jian Wushuang? You didn't die." Jian Wushuang nodded with a bitter smile. "I'm lucky I didn't die. Let's not talk about this. Let's find a place to settle down." At this moment, everyone's tense nerves were completely relaxed. He did not die, and everyone firmly believed that there was still a chance in the divine power universe. The Divine Power Universe army of nearly 1,000,000 soldiers set up camp on the plain. After all, every inch of space here was filled with pure godly power, and recovering quickly was the most important thing. It was not until the severely injured cultivators were properly taken care of that Jian Wushuang noticed that not far away, a middle-aged man in a plain golden robe was looking at him with a smile. Behind the middle-aged man with an extraordinary aura, the only two survivors of the Qilin's 5 sons, Lu Ting and Lu Gong, were standing there. Almost instinctively, Jian Wushuang realized that the middle-aged man was the master of this world. "Little friend, your body is indeed extraordinary. You've fully recovered in just a few years." The middle-aged man, together with Lu Ting and Lu Gong, quickly came to Jian Wushuang. "Many thanks for fellow Taoists' life-saving grace. I cannot thank you enough." Jian Wushuang cupped his hands and said solemnly. The middle-aged man laughed heartily. "My name is Lu Ding, the eldest son of the Qilin clan. If you don't mind, you can also call me Big Brother Lu." Looking at Lu Ting and Lu Gong behind the middle-aged man, Jian Wushuang knew that the middle-aged man was telling the truth. Without much hesitation, Jian Wushuang cupped his hands again and said with a smile, "Big Brother Lu." The middle-aged man named Lu Ding nodded with a smile. "How many years has it been? This is my personal realm called the Kanggu Platform. It's finally of some use." "Kanggu Platform? Where is this?" "It's near the Shattered Rodu, near the Spring of Chaos," Lu Ding explained. Jian Wushuang nodded. When the Rodu star field was destroyed, he vaguely felt that there was a strange energy attached to the Spring of Chaos. Now that he thought about it, it must be the Kanggu Platform. "I don't know how many eras have passed since I entered this place as a young man. I don't know anything about what happened outside. I've already wasted half of my life," Lu Ding said, half reminiscing and half sighing. "If I hadn't taken that step, I'm afraid the trial of the Divine Power Universe would have been my eternal regret." At this point, a bright light flickered in Lu Ding's eyes. A sharp aura, which had experienced the vicissitudes of life, emerged. Jian Wushuang, who was about to comfort Lu Ding, was shocked when he felt everything around him. The kind of existence that was completely beyond the world, yet controlled the laws of all things, and created laws with every breath. Lu Ding was a cultivator at the Ancestor Realm. Another Ancestor Realm cultivator. There should have only been 2 such godly existences that represented the entire universe and could materialize the entire universe. However, now, 5 of them had appeared. For the Void Universe, there was Void God, Devouring Emperor and Devour One. As for the Divine Power Universe, there was Cosmos God. And now, in the Kanggu Platform near the Spring of Chaos, the Qilin clan had actually given birth to another one. Jian Wushuang felt that his thoughts were a mess. Back then, when he was sitting in enlightenment in the Cloud Palace, he had heard about the fate of the universe and the pinnacle of cultivation realms from Cosmos God. In short, whether it was the Divine Power Universe or the Void Universe, only 2 Ancestor Realm entities could be born. In the vast universe, although there was a lot of divine power, there was only 10% of fate energy. The most crucial step for someone to reach the Ancestor Realm was to grasp that 10% of fate energy that was scattered across the entire universe. Cosmos God and Fengtian Patriarch were good examples. Fengtian Patriarch was unable to break through to the Ancestor Realm because Cosmos Gods had first comprehended that 10% of the fate energy in the universe. The reason why there could only be one Ancestor Realm expert in the entire universe was that no matter who it was, the moment they reached the Ancestor Realm, they would become the controller of the order of the entire universe. They would become the guardian of the rules of the Great Tao. The Ancestor Realm, from a certain perspective, was equivalent to the representation of the universe. Unless the previous Ancestor Realm expert died, there was no possibility of a second Ancestor Realm expert appearing under this Great Tao. The peak of the universe was the Ancestor level. Jian Wushuang had believed in this without a doubt previously. This was because the rules and divine power that Cosmos God controlled were too vast. He could no longer think of any power that could surpass it. However, after experiencing all the great catastrophe battles, Jian Wushuang's thoughts completely changed. Old Master and Devouring Emperor were obviously beyond the Ancestor Realm. Even a true ancestor realm like Void God would not be able to cause any harm to Old Master. Jian Wushuang seemed to be walking with a mist, and everything was pushing him forward in the hazy unknown. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and accepted the reality very quickly. At the same time, he was happy that an ancestor realm expert had appeared in the Qilin clan. It would be an unimaginable impact on the war between the two universes. Looking at Jian Wushuang, who had just come back to his senses, Lu Ding laughed again. Palace Master Wushuang is a true heaven's favorite. From your bone structure, I can tell that you're not even 1,000,000 years old. As soon as these words came out, both Lu Ting and Lu Gong sucked in a cold breath. Judging from the previous battle, Jian Wushuang was the strongest person below the ancestor level. He had killed a half-ancestor with one superpower attack, which left a deep impression in everyone's mind. They had thought that Jian Wushuang was an old monster who had cultivated with Zeus for countless chaos cycles, but he had only cultivated for 900,000 years? What kind of genius was that to be able to reach such a stage? One must know that even the most ordinary descendant of their Qilin clan would need 10 million years to hibernate once. To be able to grow to such a level in less than 1/10 of the typical time spent in a dormant state, it only made one feel that all his years of cultivation had been wasted. After hearing Jian Wushuang's affirmation, even Lu Ding, who had already entered the ancestor level, shook his head and smiled bitterly. So there really were unparalleled geniuses in this world. After that, Jian Wushuang explained in detail all the major events in the universe over the past hundreds of thousands of years to Lu Ding. Then he cupped his hands and said goodbye. He was eager to know the current situation of the divine power universe. He flew toward the bamboo house. Supreme Shui Bo had already woken up. White Ape, Long Yen, Long Qi, and Wu Jianxian were all sitting in meditation, trying to recover from their injuries as soon as possible. Upon seeing Jian Wushuang, Supreme Shui Bo quickly stood up, but Jian Wushuang pressed him down on the bamboo bed. Master Shui Bo, you don't have to be so polite. Palace Master Wushuang, we all thought that you had died and your Tao disappeared. It's a blessing that we can see you again today. Shui Bo's eyes were slightly red as he spoke. Jian Wushuang sighed with emotion. At the same time, he had some doubts. Based on his divine body and divine power consumption at that time, he could not withstand the full power attack of Void God at all. Old Master was also seriously injured by the sneak attack at that time, and he was also unable to resist. Facing such a terrifying attack, one would definitely die. However, Jian Wushuang was fine. Even after he woke up, there was no sign of any hidden injuries on his body. Jian Wushuang thought about it for a while and then threw it to the back of his mind. Then, he began to ask about everything that had happened when he and Old Master had died. Everyone's calm and tragic death resurfaced in Jian Wushuang's mind. All the geniuses of their respective eras had turned into bones in the desolate off-world battlefield. It was so depressing that Jian Wushuang could not breathe. Everything that should not have happened, the old friends who should not have died, had all left. Jian Wushuang already had an answer in his heart as to how to stop this scene from happening again. When he heard that it was Lu Ding who had received the remnants of the entire divine power universe after the battle of the Great Catastrophe War, Jian Wushuang also vaguely knew that he and Old Master had been received by Lu Ding when they were floating somewhere in the universe. After hearing everything, Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice, "The day we recover from our injuries will be the day we can wield our swords again." Supreme Shui Bo never refuted Jian Wushuang's words. He nodded firmly. Jian Wushuang walked to another bamboo house after giving some instructions. Lung Rushuang had been waiting outside the door. She had not closed her eyes for many years, and she looked extremely haggard. Jian Wushuang's heart ached, and he reached out to pull her into his arms. "Husband, it's all because I'm useless. That's why Feng Qi had to pay such a big price to save me." Leng Rushuang sobbed. "Silly girl, it's not your fault. It's because of matriarch Feng Qi's righteousness that she was willing to sacrifice herself to save you." Jian Wushuang wiped away her tears with his hand and said softly, "Don't worry. I will definitely help matriarch Feng Qi get out of danger." After leaving Lang Rushuang in Lanlan's care, Jian Wushuang quickly walked into the magic barrier set up by the descendant of the Phoenix clan. As soon as he stepped on it, a scorching flame rose with the wind. Even the divine power in Jian Wushuang's body felt a burning pain. At this moment, the remaining 2,000 descendants of the Phoenix clan were all sitting on the ground. The divine power of an ordinary supreme expert at the very least formed a huge fire phoenix with its wings spread out. Together, they drew a nirvana array formation, and in the center of this array core lay Feng Qi's thin and weak figure. With just one glance, Jian Wushuang realized that Feng Qi's current situation was far more serious than he had imagined. Her shattered divine soul was like wisps of smoke and clouds, dissipating without stopping. She could no longer hold it together. If she did not belong to the Phoenix clan, one of the three ancient clans, that void god's attack would have been enough to kill her. Perhaps sensing the intrusion of an external force, a bare-chested handsome young man stood up. When he was about to get angry and attack, he saw that it was Jian Wushuang, and the anger in his eyes turned into sadness. "How's the situation? Do you need me to do anything?" Jian Wushuang walked up quickly and asked. The handsome young man wanted to say something, but he hesitated. In the end, he said, "I'm afraid that it will be very difficult for the matriarch to get through this." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's heart sank. "That's impossible. Don't all the members of the Phoenix clan have the ability to be reborn? I've seen Feng Qi use it before. She recovered from the state of near death very quickly." "That's right. Our Phoenix clan can indeed undergo nirvana. However, our matriarch's soul has already dispersed. We can't even wake her up. So how can she undergo nirvana?" The handsome young man's eyes dimmed. "Even if the descendants of my clan worked together, we couldn't wake her up." Looking at the dissipating soul that could not be suppressed even in the nirvana formation, he was afraid that if this continued, Feng Qi would really die. Without thinking, Jian Wushuang said directly, "Can you let me enter the formation? I'd like to try." There was a flash of hesitation in the handsome young man's eyes. However, before he could say anything, Jian Wushuang directly stepped into the formation. "Ah!" An anxious voice came from behind. "You must hurry up. I'm afraid that the matriarch might die at any moment." Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang came to the center of the formation. He looked at Feng Qi, who was sleeping with her eyes closed, and slowly sat down in front of her. "I'm coming." The scorching little flame dissipated with the wind. Jian Wushuang seemed to be having a heart-to-heart talk with Feng Qi, telling her about the past. From the first time they met to the time they fought side by side. He described it as if he was talking about his family's treasure. "I'm very grateful for everything you've done. You saved my life in Rodu, and you also saved my wife's life in the off-world battlefield without hesitation. I now owe you 2 lives. If you don't wake up, I'm afraid I won't be able to repay you. After you wake up, I'll make 3 promises to you and the Phoenix clan. No matter where I am or when I am, these 3 promises will be valid forever. In addition, I think that in the coming years, the divine power universe will be too boring if there are no women like you." The calm words were accompanied by hair-thin flames that spread in the array. The handsome young man who was like an ant on a hot pan outside the array had also stopped in his tracks at this moment. His eyes were fixed on the center of the array. Feng Qi's soul, which had been constantly dissipating, began to stop dissipating. At the same time, those scattered souls began to transform into the appearance of the little fire phoenix and quickly returned to her body. Seeing this, Jian Wushuang was overjoyed. He cut open his left wrist and the divine blood that belonged to a perfect life form dripped on the left half of Feng Qi's body. The divine blood, which contained vigorous and tough life force, was like a vine, quickly repairing and nourishing Feng Qi's broken body. Her skin was filling up rapidly, and every meridian was being repaired. Feng Qi's pale face was also turning red quickly. After a long time, Feng Qi slowly opened her eyes and looked at Jian Wushuang, who was nourishing her with divine blood. She said, "I heard everything you said just now." Jian Wushuang, who was already a little dizzy, forced a smile and said, "It's good that you heard me. If you didn't, I would have wasted my breath." "Are you serious about what you said?" Feng Qi continued to ask. Jian Wushuang nodded. Naturally, Feng Qi looked happy. She did not notice Jian Wushuang's pale face. You don't owe me anything. I saved you willingly. After bleeding for nearly half an incense's time, even Jian Wushuang could not hold on any longer. You quickly undergo nirvana. I can't hold on much longer. Feng Qi finally came back to her senses. She hurriedly stood up and covered the wound on Jian Wushuang's wrist with her hand. You're really a fool. You've lost so much life source origin blood. Aren't you afraid of damaging your life source? Jian Wushuang shook his head slowly. Don't worry about me. Your matter is more important. So don't delay it. Then wait for me here, and don't leave no matter what. Feng Qi bit her lips. If you leave, I won't go into nirvana. Jian Wushuang only felt dizzy and could not care about anything else. He could only nod repeatedly. Feng Qi smiled, turned around, and walked away. In front of her, a barrier that was burning with terrifying flames had been completely opened. A pair of fiery wings suddenly spread out behind Feng Qi's back, and then she entered the fire domain. Her front foot left the ground, and Jian Wushuang fainted in the center of the formation. The Phoenix clan's descendants did not dare to step into the formation because of the matriarch's order. They could only try to control the fire so that Jian Wushuang, who was in the eye of the formation, would feel more comfortable. Time passed by. 2 days later, tens of thousands of fiery feathers suddenly shot out of the fire domain's boundary that had been calm all this time. At the same time, a beautiful and valiant-looking woman with a pair of fiery red wings on her back rushed out. After the successful rebirth, Feng Qi ran directly to Jian Wushuang, who was sleeping on the eye of the formation. She raised her hand and cut her wrist as well. The divine blood with the phoenix breath of the ancestral bloodline dripped into Jian Wushuang's mouth. The handsome young man standing at the periphery saw this and hurriedly said, Matriarch, you must not. Feng Qi turned a deaf ear to it, and the ancestral blood of the Phoenix clan continued to drip into his mouth. Absorb it, you must absorb more. As the divine blood of the ancestral bloodline entered his throat, Jian Wushuang's 10,000 meridians began to burn at the same time. At the same time, the shadow of a phoenix with its wings spread out and chirping appeared in the center of his chest, as if it was alive. As for Feng Qi, after thinking for a while, she stretched out her right hand and quickly drew something on Jian Wushuang's left arm. Immediately, a simple phoenix totem emerged and was immediately hidden under his skin. After doing all this, Feng Qi giggled like a child, and then returned to her usual cold and lonely appearance. Feng Qi did not withdraw her hand until the ancestral blood in Jian Wushuang's body was full. Everything calmed down and Jian Wushuang fell into a deep sleep again. Feng Qi slowly walked out of the formation and said in a low voice, You guys stay here and take good care of Palace Master Wushuang. Once there's any news that he's awake, inform me. The handsome young man nodded in agreement and then continued to carefully operate the formation. As time passed, there was no such thing as day or night on the Kangoo platform. The abundant divine power made this the perfect place for meditation. As the Tao field before Lu Ding's Tao validation and becoming an ancestor, the rules of the great Tao contained here were far beyond any place in the divine power universe. This Kangoo platform was equivalent to Cosmos God's Cloud Palace back then. And listening to Tao in the Cosmos God's Cloud Palace was a great fortune that could only be encountered by chance. Usually, only the most outstanding and unparalleled geniuses in the universe would have the chance to sit on a futon and listen to the Tao. This ancestor-grade Taoist field, Kangoo platform, had opened a new door, allowing these 1 million cultivators to cultivate and comprehend the Tao. In just a few months, all the cultivators in the divine power universe had recovered from their injuries, but tens of thousands of cultivators who were severely injured had still died. At the same time, many cultivators broke through the restraints and entered the supreme realm. Jian Wushuang woke up not long after. He had thought that he would lose some of his origin divine power, but not only was it not consumed, it was also accompanied by a strange and surging power. It was not until the descendant of the Phoenix clan vaguely explained the reason that Jian Wushuang realized that the endless life aura in his meridians was because of the divine blood of the ancestral bloodline that Feng Qi had transferred to him. Shaking his head helplessly, Jian Wushuang was about to leave the formation when Feng Qi appeared in front of him in a red flowing cloud gown. Feng Qi's eyes suddenly lit up. She hurriedly went up and used her palm to check. Jian Wushuang was embarrassed and quickly covered his exposed chest. How is that possible? He should have been able to break through that realm. Feng Qi frowned and muttered. After tidying up his clothes, Jian Wushuang said, "What are you talking about? You're so mysterious." Feng Qi did not hide anything and said frankly, "When you gave me your blood essence earlier, I vaguely felt that your aura had already reached the critical point of a breakthrough. But why is there no sign of a breakthrough now? Do you think it's that easy to break through to the half-ancestor realm? Which half-ancestor hasn't been immersed in the invincible supreme realm for countless years before they managed to grasp a small opportunity?" Jian Wushuang shook his head and smiled bitterly. "As for me, it has only been 100,000 years since I became an invincible supreme. I'm afraid it will take a long time for me to become a half-ancestor." When Feng Qi heard this, she subconsciously pouted and said, "It doesn't seem that difficult to advance to the half-ancestor level. I remember that I only took a nap back then, and then I became a half-ancestor." Jian Wushuang was dumbfounded for a moment. Then he nodded, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "I'll try my best." Feng Qi said seriously, "You're different from the others. My intuition has always been accurate." "Is definitely right." Looking at the Phoenix matriarch, who was so determined to believe in him, he felt a lot better. After saying goodbye to Feng Qi, Jian Wushuang walked slowly on the grassy plain. Pure divine power filled every inch of space, giving people an indescribable sense of comfort. Jian Wushuang had already decided that when Old Master's injuries recovered, he would once again face the Void Universe army led by Void God. And in this short period of time, the thought that had only appeared in his mind for a moment resurfaced. Perhaps I should really try to comprehend that realm? Jian Wushuang looked into the distance and saw Lu Ding walking over with a kind smile. "Shall we go for a walk?" "Sure." The two figures leisurely strolled around the Kangoo platform, experiencing all kinds of scenery and looking at countless rare and exotic beasts. In the clouds, the two of them were like banished immortals in the sky, sitting and watching the strange clouds in the great realm. The mountains and rivers connected the sky and the earth, and the four seasons changed in a flash. As the wind and clouds changed, Jian Wushuang's state of mind had already changed. "When I was young, I only liked to play. All kinds of rare beasts, famous mountains and giant rivers. I never grew tired of them. Later, because of various reasons, I cultivated hard until now. Although my state of mind has changed, my love for fun has never changed." As he talked about the past, there was a sense of satisfaction and pride in Lu Ding's expression. "So I simply moved all the things I used to like to this Kangoo platform. What you see now is real and has existed before." Jian Wushuang smiled and said, "Big Brother Lu, your state of mind has already surpassed 99% of the people in the world. You are able to maintain your original state of mind as always." Lu Ding laughed heartily and looked at Jian Wushuang with a much gentler gaze. "I once thought that I was born by riding on the heavenly Tao and that I was a rare heaven's favorite in all the realms. But it was not until today that I realized that there is no end to this." Jian Wushuang did not speak and waited for the rest. "This world of the Kangoo platform that I've created is tens of times larger than the Rodu star field that my clan used to have. However, it's like a drop in the ocean when it's attached to the spring of chaos. At the same time, I also know how insignificant I am. The peak of my cultivation realm is only the ceiling of the rules of the underworld." At this point, Lu Ding paused for a moment before continuing, "Palace Master Wushuang, do you think that ancestor realm is the true peak?" Jian Wushuang only felt that the knowledge that existed in his mind was even more confusing. The vast and mysterious realm in the land of sorrows, the strange words Snake God had said in the polar sea star field, Old Master who had walked out of the Black River, and the Devourers, the mysterious organization. All of these things had increased his understanding of the world. If the ancestor realm isn't the true peak, then what is above it? Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and said slowly. Hearing this, Lu Ding laughed out loud. "I don't know either." Jian Wushuang was dumbfounded, and then he shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. He had really gone in a big circle and returned to the original place. But one thing is for sure. If you want to know more, you have to jump out of the rules that bind you. Lu Ding smiled. For example, you should make a breakthrough now. Half-ancestor, huh? Jian Wushuang murmured. It's indeed time. Endless divine power started to spread out from his body. Like leaves and vines, it stretched out in the air. Seeing this, Lu Ding smiled and retreated from this world. Between the rolling clouds, thousands of scarlet golden divine beams shot up into the sky. At this moment, all the cultivators in the divine power universe on the Kangwu platform looked in shock at the direction of the golden sky. A half-ancestor vindicated their Tao. Their Tao flowed and their treasure light grew endlessly. Is this guy really going crazy to save the divine power universe? Great Void Divine Emperor, who was sitting cross-legged in comprehension, stood up slowly. His gaze was as calm as usual. The heavenly Tao vindication had only lasted for 10 years, and even becoming an invincible supreme had taken 1,000 years. When all the cultivators saw the sky darken, their hearts trembled. Did he fail? How could he have failed? Ninth Culpa King, Feng Qi, Supreme Shuebo, and the others were all looking in that direction nervously. The door of the remote bamboo house, which had been silent for nearly 10 years and had never been opened once, was slowly pushed open. Old Master stood by the door with a calm expression. The two brothers, Lu Ting and Lu Gong, who had gone through many bloody battles with Jian Wushuang, blurted out almost subconsciously, "Brother, did Jian Wushuang fail?" Lu Ding did not answer, but a faint smile hung on his face. If he fails just like that, then he's not the person I approve of. The two of them looked at each other. To be able to receive such an evaluation from their big brother, it seemed that Jian Wushuang had succeeded this time. After 10 years, the grass that was originally only an inch long had now reached his knees. The golden glow in the sky disappeared as quickly as it came. It returned to normal in a very short time. A gust of wind blew past, and a figure with clouds and mist around him gradually appeared in everyone's eyes. However, the unbridled aura of the immortal Qi made Jian Wushuang, who was only wearing black pants, stand out even more. Feng Qi laughed out loud. In her memory, this guy seemed to like to rip off his clothes at every important moment. After that, Feng Qi unfolded the flowing fire wings on her back and took the lead to meet Jian Wushuang. "Here you go." Feng Qi stretched out her hand and handed him a white robe. She smiled and said, You can actually break through in such a short time. I really underestimated you." Jian Wushuang took the white robe and put it on. He smiled and said, "I was lucky." The divine power that spread out from Jian Wushuang's body was no longer the divine power of an invincible supreme. Instead, it was a kind of ethereal and indescribable smoke. The misty clouds were proof that Jian Wushuang had become a half-ancestor. The originally calm atmosphere was completely heated up. Chu Ji, who had been rescued by Jian Wushuang from the Void Universe, was watching this scene from a distance. "Sister Lan Lan, do you think that stupid chess player has reached a very powerful realm? A realm even more powerful than my master's?" Lan Lan smiled and rubbed the back of Chu Ji's head. "That's right. He's already very, very powerful now. He can protect the things he wants to protect." Lan Lan was stunned. After a long while, she sighed. "Sister Lan Lan, do you think that if I want to be the terrible chess player's Tao child, will he want me?" "Don't worry. If that day comes, he will definitely agree." A total of 970,000 cultivators, after recuperating for almost 10 years, came out of seclusion in the broken Rodu and once again launched an attack on the army of void warriors that had invaded the divine power universe. Every appearance of that tenacious figure who always walked at the forefront of the army was a true transformation. He was able to fight against a half-ancestor while he was at the invincible supreme realm. Now that he had advanced to the half-ancestor realm, who could stop him? Standing on the completely destroyed Rodu star field, Jian Wushuang looked back at the endless army behind him. He raised the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand and shouted, "Fight! From the off-world battlefield to the hinterland of the divine power universe, it had become a dead zone in the 10 years since the gate was opened. The rules of the Great Tao were broken, and his luck was extremely weak. For some unknown reason, a large area of the star field that had become a dead area no longer gave birth to divine power. What replaced it was the birth of weak void power. Jian Wushuang frowned. In a short 10 years, the fate energy of the divine power universe had shrunk to the extreme. It was even affected by the void universe and started to be eroded. As he rushed to the off-world battlefield, Jian Wushuang found an army of nearly 10,000 scar-level void masters in the Hengyang star field area, which had been occupied by void warriors. Jian Wushuang killed the 10,000 void masters with a wave of his hand and left a single 6-scar void master to ask about the current situation. After learning that most of the elites of the void universe were still stationed in the off-world battlefield, Jian Wushuang led the army and killed their way there. In order to completely destroy the divine power universe, almost every 10,000 scar-level void masters formed a unit and rapidly devoured the living forces. The number of star fields and divine kingdoms that had been completely destroyed was no less than 10,000. In the broken off-world battlefield, the original base city had been occupied by the army of void warriors. Since the end of the Great Catastrophe War 10 years ago, void gods had returned to the void universe and slept until now. Even though Devouring Emperor was nowhere to be found, his organization had always been the mastermind behind the plan. Wherever the Devourers went, no one was left alive. When the million-strong divine power universe army set foot on the off-world battlefield again, all the void masters who were guarding the place retreated. As the sword struck out, a sword-intent waterfall that seemed to split the world in half surged out. The entire base camp occupied by the void warriors was completely destroyed by this sword. The entire void of the off-world battlefield trembled under the sword-intent waterfall. Looking at the less than 26 scars void masters, Jian Wushuang put away the tarot divine sword and said in a deep voice, "Ask your master to come here and die." All the 6-scar void masters trembled and turned to flee. However, in the next moment, the huge crack hidden in the darkness at the intersection of the two universes slowly opened. Two enormous palms that covered the sky slowly tore apart the barrier. It was the ancestral phantom form of the demon god. It had 4 horns on its head and 6 dark chains around its body. Void energy surged, void god descended from the demon god phantom form. When the nightmare-like existence appeared, Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and stepped forward. An equally vigorous and unparalleled divine power rose up into the sky, and an unparalleled phantom image that was unrestrained and sublimated by divine patterns appeared. This was a true collision between half-ancestor realm divine power and ancestor-level void power, but the divine power was not suppressed. Instead, it was in a stalemate. Void God's eyes were emotionless. Behind him, the countless void masters were like demons that had walked out of hell, covering the sky and pressing down. The power of the divine power universe is gone. If you commit suicide in front of me, I'll leave you with an intact corpse. Void God's cold voice resounded. Before Jian Wushuang could speak, the demon god ancestral phantom form behind Void God raised its arm and pressed down on Jian Wushuang. The giant palm that was surging with strange runes was repelled by a Qilin when it descended. The form of Qilin, which possessed the power of extreme yang, appeared behind Lu Ting, and it was filled with the might of the 3 ancient clans. His Confucian robe fluttered in the wind. Lu Ding looked at Void God calmly. At this moment, he was like the king of Qilin, releasing the ancestor-level power of extreme yang. Void God's eyes focused. The supreme divine power surging around the middle-aged man was at the ancestor realm. Since when was there another ancestor realm being other than Cosmos God in the divine power universe? Before he could even think, Jian Wushuang's extremely sharp sword had already come down on his head. He had become a half-ancestor in 10 years. Only Jian Wushuang knew how great the comprehension he had gained was. The carefreeness of traversing hundreds of millions of miles in the Kangoo platform finally laid the foundation for Jian Wushuang to become a half-ancestor, the comprehension of all things. Jian Wushuang, who had grown up under pressure, only wanted to protect his people. It was also because he had comprehended his own Tao too early that everything had come to fruition and he had entered the half-ancestor realm. Wushuang Sword Tao, Star River Lake Sea Sword Intent. The second move, River. The endless sword intent condensed into a sword waterfall and river. It was the most ordinary but also the most powerful move, which laid the framework of the entire Wushuang Sword Tao. The vast and vigorous river of sword intent went against the current and faced the ancestral demon god form. Looking at the sword intent released by his opponent, who was like an ant in the past, even he felt a little scared at this moment. Void God waved his sleeves, and the ancestral demon god form behind him roared and waved its two giant arms that were wrapped in chains to counter the attack. As the two of them clashed, the sword waterfall roared and directly crushed the two arms of the ancestral form. Then, without losing any momentum, it fell on the ancestral demon god form like thousands of swords hanging in the sky. At that moment, both the divine power universe and the void universe were shocked. With the power of half-ancestor, he had broken an ancestor-level demon ancestral form. Jian Wushuang's growth had completely exceeded everyone's imagination. Even Xue Bo, who was the closest to Jian Wushuang, was in disbelief. The ancestral demon god form that covered the sky wailed in grief as it spewed out a huge amount of void energy. Countless sword intents pierced through the surface of its body, and it had completely dimmed. Void God took a step back. He looked at the figure in disbelief. It was only a difference of 10 years, but the ant that he could kill with a wave of his hand had become what he was now. Without giving Void God any time to catch his breath, Jian Wushuang put his right index and middle fingers together and drew a vast sword intent. He had no sword in his hand, but a sword in his heart. The vast sword intent weaved together like a dense net and covered Void God. Lu Ding followed closely behind. He smiled slightly, and the form of Qilin appeared behind him, turning into countless forces of extreme yang and attacking the army of Void warriors. The power of the ancestor realm was not something that a Void master could resist. As soon as the Qilin's ultimate yang power was released, 300,000 Void masters who had just entered the divine power universe were all turned into dust. The destructive power of an ancestor realm was too terrifying. The life and death of all living things could be determined with a single thought. Even a half-ancestor could only die on the spot. In just a moment, more than half of the army of millions that had just been formed from the Void universe had been wiped out. Just as Lu Ding was about to strike again, another terrifying being walked out of the chasm. Devouring Emperor, who was wearing a black and gold robe and had an imperial crown on his head, had arrived like the ruler of the darkness. His appearance put Lu Ding on guard. However, the Devouring Emperor's eyes never stopped on him. Instead, he looked at Old Master. "You really didn't die." Suppressed anger filled with unwillingness reverberated through the entire battlefield. Old Master looked calm and looked at the Devouring Emperor with disdain. "Do you think you can kill me?" A short sentence ignited the Devouring Emperor. The Void trembled, and 8 true shadows appeared behind him. "If I can injure you once, I can injure you a second time. Wait for me to devour you." The 8 true shadows were of different colors, but their faces were exactly the same as Old Master's face. Like the sudden arrival of extreme darkness, each of the true shadows with Ancesto realm strength rushed over. Lu Ding did not have the time to make a move. He immediately turned his thick extreme yang divine power into a barrier to block the army of cultivators. Boom, boom, boom. The combined attack of the 8 true shadows easily tore through Lu Ding's extreme yang divine power and headed straight for Old Master. The earth-shaking power even made Lu Ding's heart palpitate. That terrifying power that was difficult to understand, was it really ancestor realm power? On the other side, Jian Wushuang approached Void God with only one palm raised. He seemed much more relaxed. He was like a flying immortal in the sky. Each of his light attacks was enough to damage Void God. Void God, who could have killed him with one palm back then, could now only barely resist the continuous attacks. Jian Wushuang pointed forward, and the invisible sword intent pierced Void God's left shoulder. As the ancestral blood gushed out, his expression became ferocious. "The worst decision I've ever made was to let you live." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's calm mind trembled. What did you say? Void God's eyes were cold. I didn't expect that you could grow to this level in just 10 years. If I had known that, I would have killed you on the spot. Instantly, the final scene of the Great Catastrophe War 10 years ago surged into their minds. Jian Wushuang finally understood why he and Old Master could survive. It turned out that the attack of Void God, which was enough to destroy everything, had pushed them far away the moment it was about to explode. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang asked in a deep voice, "Why did you do that?" Void God sneered. "There's always a reasonable concern behind all unreasonable things, but I'm still wrong. To make up for my mistake, I'll completely destroy you today." With a deep voice, Void God's body, which was originally wrapped in black mist, instantly lit up with countless mysterious runes. Jian Wushuang only felt a great horror of life and death surging in his heart. He almost relied on his instinct to turn sideways and dodged several chains that swept out of Void God's body. The clothes on his left shoulder, which had just touched the chain, began to tear quickly. After missing his attack, the chains returned to his body. Void God, who was covered in mysterious runes, looked at Jian Wushuang with burning eyes. Void God, who carried the fate energy of the entire Void universe, was extremely terrifying. Even Jian Wushuang felt a sense of life and death crisis when facing him. The destruction of the divine power universe is a foregone conclusion. Your appearance is just adding the last sorrowful stroke to the divine power universe. I will remember you, but you must die by my hands. Void God's eyes were burning. After saying this, he did not plan on saying anything else. The countless mysterious runes around him gradually sublimated into the void and condensed into a strange formation. The void power was like silk and mist, descending from the ancient formation. As soon as this vast and strange array was used, both the Supreme Realm experts and the Void Masters felt the power in their bodies weaken to a certain level. Even Jian Wushuang felt that the divine power in his body was suppressed by an unknown force. The void power spread out, and a vast array appeared above Void God's head. Countless chains shot out from his body, shooting out in all directions with a destructive aura. White Ape, the Overlord Patriarch, felt a sense of life and death approaching. He subconsciously pushed the Overlord a few hundred meters away. The chain with ancestral-level power easily pierced through White Ape's abdomen, and even his soul was about to be destroyed. Patriarch, Overlord wanted to rush over madly, but he was stopped by White Ape. "Don't come over, you brat." Divine blood seeped out of White Ape's mouth, and his body quickly turned into dust. He looked at the Overlord with eyes full of reluctance. "Live well. When you win, you can take me back." With that, White Ape rushed into the army of Void Warriors at the last moment of his death. Boom! The magnificent explosion tore a crack in the army, and several six-scar Void Masters were killed. Lu Ding made his move and covered himself with the power of Yang. Only then was he able to barely repel the chains that were coming at him. Jian Wushuang's face was as calm as water. He no longer cared if Void God had changed. He immediately condensed an invisible sword and slashed at him. A vast sword intent rose, and the sword style was like the flowing light-covered Void God like a heavenly river. There was a ferocious laugh, and then two huge palms separated the sword intent river. At the same time, the huge head of the ancestral demon god form bit at Jian Wushuang without saying anything. Unable to dodge in time, his entire body was swallowed by the ancestral demon god form. As far as the eye could see, the endless black fog was like a chain that trapped him in his stomach. The demon god had its own rules and was nibbling away at Jian Wushuang's divine power at an extremely fast speed. The ancestral form shut its mouth in satisfaction and lay down on the back of Void God. Sensing the increasingly weak struggle in the ancestral form, Void God finally relaxed. He looked not far away, where Lu Ding was already rushing over with the power of Yang. Void God did not dare to be careless since they were both Ancestor Realm experts. "Spit out, Palace Master Wushuang." Lu Ding's face was livid. "Otherwise, don't blame me for killing you on the spot." As if he had heard the funniest joke in the world, Void God sneered. I don't understand. You're already an ancestor. Why do you still care about a little half-ancestor? A glint flashed across Lu Ding's eyes, but he did not say anything. He waved his arm, and a Qilin form surrounded by extreme yang power roared and attacked Void God. The ancestral demon god form behind him saw this and swung its two giant arms at the Qilin. Instantly, the battlefield trembled. After the void power and divine power collided, the light waves produced lit up the darkness. Void God and Lu Ding both took a step back. Before the Qilin form finally dissipated, it tore off half of the demon god's arm. Let Palace Master Wushuang out. Otherwise, it won't be your ancestral form's arm that's going to be broken next time, Lu Ding said in a low voice. Void God did not say anything. Just as he was about to attack again, the ancestral form behind him suddenly trembled. In the next moment, a river of swords shot out and exploded the head of the ancestral demon god form. At the same time, a figure with divine patterns floating all over his body stepped forward with a sword in hand. The tarot divine sword was pointed at the ground. Jian Wushuang looked at Void God arrogantly, and then he raised the tarot divine sword and slashed down. This sword was so powerful that it could split the sky. The ancestral demon god form crumbled immediately, and Void God raised his hand to resist. Seeing that Jian Wushuang was fine, Lu Ding was overjoyed. He controlled his yang divine power to attack Void God together. This attack even destroyed the void. It was like a black hole that devoured all things, absorbing all the divine power and void power that dissipated in the universe. All the supreme experts and void masters who were fighting were shocked by this scene. When the light faded, Void God, whose left arm had been destroyed and whose chest had been opened, slowly took a step forward. The void power dissipated, and it could not even continue to repair his broken body. Jian Wushuang descended with his sword in hand. He looked at him with a complicated expression. If Void God had killed him during the last great catastrophe war, he and Old Master would have had no chance of survival. However, in the end, he let them go for some reason. No one spoke first. Even though most of his body was shattered, Void God still stood upright, and the shadow in their eyes did not change. I just want to ask you one thing. We are clearly mortal enemies. So why did you let us go back then? Jian Wushuang did not carry out the next step. Instead, he used a voice that only the two of them could hear to question Void God. There's no reason why. Everything that has happened today is all because of me. My biggest mistake was underestimating your growth potential. Void God looked at Jian Wushuang and said slowly, Your terrifying growth rate has far exceeded my expectations. Without saying anything, Jian Wushuang understood why Void God had let him live. However, what had already happened and no one could change it. An invisible sword with a red-gold divine pattern appeared in his hand. Jian Wushuang said, You should know the situation that is coming up. I will not let you live. Void God's calm face curved into a smile. My life isn't that easy to take. Just come. Jian Wushuang was also unusually calm. If this guy stretched out his neck to be killed, he would not be Void God. He turned his body into a sword intent, and the infinite swordway rainbow was like a big river that instantly swept toward Void God. Don't! Devouring Emperor, who was being held up by Old Master, shouted. He wanted to help Jian Wushuang, but he could not let go. He could only watch Jian Wushuang's sword stab at Void God. Puchi! The sound of metal penetrating flesh reverberated. The Wushuang sword Dao's river poured into Void God's chest, destroying his ancestral source. He did not dodge at all. He just stood there and let Jian Wushuang's long sword pierce through him. Jian Wushuang was shocked. If Void God fought with all his might, the best outcome would be that Void God would die and he would be seriously injured. However, Void God did not resist. Instead, after Jian Wushuang's long sword pierced his body, he reached out his hand, grabbed the sword blade, and pushed it forward. The void power collapsed, and the Tao that belonged to Void God was being destroyed. Unparalleled fate energy began to overflow from his body and was fed back to the Void universe through the chasm. All the Void Masters who were fighting desperately felt that Void God was about to die, so they all looked at him in despair. Jian Wushuang, I destroyed my ancestor realm fate energy just to ask you for one thing. Void God's body disintegrated at a slow speed, then turned into stars that were constantly destroyed. Everything started because of me, and it will end because of me. If I die, you can't hurt a single person in my Void universe. From now on, the Void universe will never step into the Divine Power universe. Void God looked at Jian Wushuang, hoping to hear a promise from him. Jian Wushuang did not say anything. Instead, he looked calm as he stabbed the invisible sword into Void God's body. What do you think the Divine Power universe is? Do you think that you can atone for all your past sins by dying? Then what about those who have died to fight against you in our Divine Power universe? Each word was like a knife, like a cry of blood. They! Jian Wushuang pulled out the Tarot Divine sword with his left hand and pointed it at all the Void Masters in the off-world battlefield. I'll count them one by one. None of them can live. All the Void Masters trembled as the shadow of death loomed over their hearts. Void God looked at Jian Wushuang in a daze. He realized that the person in front of him, who had stepped into the Void universe and set up the formation, and fought to the last moment, was his ultimate enemy. Unknowingly, this short 100,000 years of growth had turned him into someone even more terrifying than Cosmos God. He was iron-blooded and someone that could unite people. Are you serious? Void God's eyes gradually lost their light. Jian Wushuang's face was calm, and his words were like heavy hammers. In order to prevent such a tragedy from happening again, your Void universe will be annihilated. Void God trembled and looked at Jian Wushuang in disbelief. No, you can't. Jian Wushuang did not speak, his face as calm as before. He did not want to waste any more time. Just as he was about to pull out the invisible sword, Void God's cold palm grabbed Jian Wushuang's arm. Looking at the dense runes on Void God's forehead, Jian Wushuang was shocked and prepared to leave. However, it was too late. Jian Wushuang felt the space around him become sticky, as if he had stepped into a swamp, and he could not move at all. In order to prevent the Void universe from being destroyed, I can only use my body to seal you into the space-time turbulence. Behind Void God, the space shattered and a huge whirlpool started to appear. Jian Wushuang tried his best to leave, but it was to no avail. Do you think that I won't be able to come back after you seal me into the space-time turbulence? Void God's body was almost gone. He shook his head. I don't think I can trap you forever, but if I can make you sink into that place, it'll be my last effort. Dark and shameless fellow, Jian Wushuang said angrily. After saying that, he disappeared into the space-time turbulence. At this point, the master of the Void universe, the Divine Power universe's nightmare, had died. At the same time, Jian Wushuang was pushed into the space-time turbulence. At this moment, all the Void Masters were like walking corpses, and they no longer had the thought of fighting. Under the leadership of Feng Qi, Long Yen, Long Qi, and the others, the remaining army of less than 300,000 cultivators went all out to kill the Void Masters. Seeing this, Devouring Emperor's heart was like dead ashes. The 8 true shadows returned to his body and released a vast energy to separate Old Master. He then tried to escape. Old Master did not stop him. Instead, a black scepter appeared in his right hand and he threw it at Devouring Emperor. The scepter of black power was as fast as lightning, and even Devouring Emperor could not avoid it without even making a sound. Devouring Emperor fell straight into the void. The remaining members of the Devourers carried Devouring Emperor and dashed into the crack, disappearing into the Void universe. There was a brief silence in the off-world battlefield. Nearly 1 million elite Void Masters of the Void universe looked at everything in despair. Old Master slowly descended from the void, his black water robe fluttering in the wind. Feng Qi flapped her huge fire wings and arrived behind Old Master. At the same time, Long Yen, Long Qi, Shuebo, and the others also stood behind Old Master. Although very few people in the Divine Power universe could hear Old Master speak, what he had done for the Divine Power universe had long been imprinted in everyone's hearts. Looking at the millions of Void warriors still on the battlefield, Old Master said slowly, "Leave no one alive." No one had any objections. Feng Qi led the less than 1,000 descendants of the Phoenix clan and turned into a giant phoenix that covered the sky. They carried out the final slaughter. The two half-ancestors, Long Yen and Long Qi, followed closely behind and also plunged into the army of Void Warriors. Supreme Xue Bo also descended into the army of Void Masters and sought revenge with grief and indignation. When the last Scar-level Void Master was killed in the off-world battlefield, the war between the two universes, which had been going on for nearly 100,000 years, finally came to an end. There were less than 200,000 Supremes experts left from the Divine Power universe that had participated in the battle of the Great Catastrophe War. None of the nearly 10 million elite Void Masters of the Void universe had survived. The entire off-world battlefield had turned into a burial ground. The remains were piled up several feet high, and it was tragic to the extreme. In this battle, from the very beginning of the primordial chaos to the present, from the ancestor realm Cosmos God, to the rulers and supremes, everyone had fallen. The war of the apocalypse, which had lasted for countless chaos cycles, had come to an end. No one knew what the purpose of this war was. It was already a tragedy for the war to have progressed to this stage. On the battlefield that had been completely destroyed, the wind howled. The surviving supreme experts did not celebrate their victory. They all looked at the place where Jian Wushuang had disappeared in silence. Old Master stood calmly on the spot the entire time, and everyone looked at him nervously. In the end, it was Supreme Xue Bo who stepped forward and asked, "Senior, can Palace Master Wushuang return from the space-time turbulence?" Old Master slowly opened his eyes and shook his head. "I don't know either. Is he not coming back?" "I don't believe it," Feng Qi said anxiously. Everyone's mood fell to the bottom of the valley. No one knew what terrifying consequences would come from opening up a space-time turbulence with ancestor-level power. Those with weaker spiritual awareness would probably be lost in it forever. Everyone's expression was dejected. Only Lu Ding's eyes flashed with regret and his face was livid, as if he had lost the most precious thing. "Let's go." Lu Ding let out a low growl and led the Qilin clan, which had less than 1,000 people, away from the off-world battlefield. After Lu Ting and Lu Gong said goodbye to the crowd, they followed Lu Ding. They made their way into the Divine Power universe. Supreme Xue Bo, the Dragon clan, and the Phoenix clan all looked at the Qilin clan with strange expressions. The War of Catastrophe, which had lasted for countless chaos cycles, had ended with Void God's death. It was a tragic victory for the Divine Power universe. The experts of both universes had been completely annihilated in this war. Even if another million chaos cycles passed, it would be difficult for the two universes to return to their pre-war state. The world was clear, and there was no longer any war to fight. The ripples on the black water disappeared, and the old man seemed to have aged significantly. He turned to look at the 200,000 supreme experts behind him and said slowly, "I will be sleeping here. Perhaps I will only wake up when he returns. You all can go back to your own places." Jian Wushuang, who had already become the backbone of the Divine Power universe, had completely disappeared in the space-time turbulence. As a result, even the Divine Power universe, who had won, had ended up in a miserable state. Earlier on, every Supreme knew clearly that if Jian Wushuang had not died, they would have launched a counterattack on the Void universe and carried out a thorough reckoning instead of ending it in such a dismal manner. However, there were no ifs. Nothing could be changed. "Counterattack the Void universe. We want revenge," a Supreme martial artist roared. Immediately after, nearly 200,000 Supreme experts shouted at the same time, "Counterattack the Void universe. Don't leave a single enemy alive." Supreme Xue Bo and the others looked at Old Master. Old Master acted as if he did not hear anything. His figure floated forward and turned into a long black river that flowed in the broken void of the off-world battlefield. In the end, the battle came to a tragic end. Out of the nearly 200,000 Supreme martial artists, 50,000 of them belonged to the Divine Life Palace, while the remaining 15,000 were scattered in the sky. The Dragon Clan and Phoenix Clan had suffered great losses, and almost all of their Supreme Realm experts had died. Nearly 70% of the sects that had come had been destroyed, and not a single person was left. Great Void Divine Emperor stood at the place where Jian Wushuang had disappeared for 100 years. In this 100 years, other than the disciples of the Divine Life Palace, there was no one else in the off-world battlefield. Great Void Divine Emperor seemed to be thinking about Jian Wushuang and what kind of existence he was. He seemed to have inherited the heavenly Tao and appeared silently. He grew from an unremarkable existence to this day, and then led the Divine Power Universe from decline to complete victory. After the Divine Power Universe had won, he suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if he had completed the task given to him by the heavenly Tao. He was like a ranger, a passerby, leaving only a fleeting shadow, and never to meet again. 100 years later, Great Void Divine Emperor left while laughing. Under the leadership of Supreme Shui Bo and Supreme Jun Fu, less than 1,000 disciples had joined forces to build the Divine Life Palace, the entrance of the Divine Power Universe to the off-world battlefield. At the same time, the news of the Divine Power Universe's victory spread quickly. Along with the news of the Divine Power Universe's victory, there was another piece of news. The patriarch of the Qilin race, Lu Ding, broke through to the ancestor realm in the midst of danger and saved the Divine Power Universe from its crisis. He led all the supreme experts to fight to the death and finally killed Void God, winning with a Pyrrhic victory. At the same time, the old era was removed, and a new era began. Lu Ding built the Kangoo platform in the Shattered Rodu to replace the position of Cosmos God. The Kangoo platform had become the Dao Plaza of the new generation of Cosmos God Lu Ding. A series of news spread in the Divine Power Universe and spread throughout the 9 heavens and 10 lands. At the same time, the most important piece of news was spread. In order to commemorate the great victory of this calamity, the new Cosmos God Lu Ding opened a Dao Plaza. All Supreme Realm experts were allowed to come and listen to the Dao. Every STFR field and Divine Kingdom could even send 10 ultimate rulers to listen to the Tao and comprehend. The moment this news was released, countless star fields and Divine Kingdoms went into a frenzy. This new Cosmos God was already showing great kindness to everyone. It was only a matter of time before he could listen to the Tao of an Ancestor Realm expert and advance to the Supreme Realm. Just opening up a dojo was enough to make the remaining star fields and Divine Kingdoms prepare themselves and go on a pilgrimage. For the next 100 years, all the outstanding geniuses of the Divine Power Universe went to the Kangoo platform to seek an audience with the new Cosmos God, Lu Ding. Preposterous! You're really shameless! A deafening sound of a table being hit reverberated from the newly built Divine Life Palace. Supreme Shui Bo's hair and beard stood on end as he looked at the urgent message from the Kangoo platform on the table. Shameless bastard! You're just fishing for fame. You're stepping on the corpses of millions of cultivators in my Divine Power Universe to get to your position. Supreme Jun Fu's face was also unsightly, and he and the 50,000 disciples of the Divine Life Palace were filled with righteous indignation. Ninth Culpa King immediately rushed out, but he was stopped by Supreme Jun Fu. Elder Ninth Culpa, don't get angry first. I want to seek justice for Jian Wushuang. Suppressing the rage in his heart, Ninth Culpa King said in a deep voice. The aura of an invincible Supreme made him look like a sharp sword. Supreme Shui Bo came behind Ninth Culpa King, put his palm on his shoulder and said, Right now, there are hundreds of things that need to be done in the Divine Power Universe, and people can't stand any more turmoil, so let's just bear with it. After taking a deep breath, Ninth Culpa King only said that he was going into seclusion. He then entered the depths of the Divine Life Palace and never came out again. From today on, the Divine Life Palace will be closed. We won't see any messengers from the Qilin clan, Supreme Shui Bo said in a low voice. Yes, the 50,000 disciples of the Divine Life Palace cupped their hands in unison. From then on, the Divine Life Palace was closed. Urgent messages from the Qilin clan to all the major sects flowed in the universe. In the Red Sky Star Field, an urgent message from the Qilin clan was placed in front of Feng Qi. However, she did not even open her eyes. In the hall, nearly 10,000 disciples of the Phoenix clan stood on both sides, looking at their great matriarch nervously. Matriarch, all of the descendants of the race who are ultimate rulers and above have arrived. the handsome young man named Feng Xiao stepped forward and said. Feng Qi slowly opened her eyes, and her beautiful eyes swept across every Phoenix clan descendant in the hall. She said in a low voice, "From today onwards, the Phoenix clan will close the star field, and no one is allowed to go out without permission. If any ignorant brat can't resist the temptation and goes to the Kangoo platform, don't blame me for cutting him into pieces in the future." In the hall, all the Phoenix clan descendants responded in unison. In addition, tell those fellows of the Dragon clan that if any one of them dares to head to the Kangoo platform to listen to the teachings, the entire Phoenix clan will fight them to the death. Phoenix matriarch's prestige was fully displayed. She looked into the distant void, and a trace of sadness flashed in her eyes. In the same year, the Dragon clan and the Phoenix clan closed their star fields, and no one went to the Kangoo platform to listen to the Tao. The Great Void Temple, Starry Sky Sword Sect, the Nine Emperor Pavilion, Nine Stars Holy Land, Sword Alliance, and the other ancient sects that had participated in the Battle of the Great Catastrophe War all announced that they would go into seclusion in the same year. They did not send anyone to listen to the teachings at the Kangoo platform. This was unprecedented in any era. Since Jian Wushuang had disappeared for nearly 300 years, the clansmen sent by countless clans had almost all rushed to the territory of the Qilin clan. Now, they were at the center of the entire divine power universe, the Kangoo platform. It was still tens of millions of miles away, but all the cultivators who came could feel a vast and supreme divine power. Everyone's face was filled with excitement. The great Tao they felt was the aura of an ancestor realm. Over 1 million cultivators had already arrived in front of the Kangoo platform from all directions of the divine power universe. The towering hall seemed to be built entirely from spiritual jade, and the vast divine power it emitted nourished every cultivator who came here. The group of 10 came from the Taitsong Shrine and stopped in front of the Kangoo platform. They were all at the ultimate ruler realm. The Taitsong Shrine had sent out all 5 Supreme Being Elders to participate in the battle. 4 of them had died on the battlefield, leaving only one top Supreme Realm cultivator who had returned with serious injuries. Eldest senior brother, do you think we'll be in trouble when we return? We came here to listen to the teachings behind the second elder's back. One of the cultivators, who was short and fat, said nervously. Before he went into seclusion, second elder even swore that he would break the legs of anyone who dared to come to the sect. The leader of the cultivators frowned. Idiot, if you don't tell, and if I don't tell, how would second elder know? Besides, we only listened to the Grand Elder's words and came here to listen to the Tao and sit in enlightenment. If second elder wants to break a leg, it should be the Grand Elder's leg. The only female disciple in this group of 10+ people looked around her, then whispered, Eldest senior brother, second senior brother, have you noticed that all the cultivators here are the ultimate rulers? I don't even see any supremes. The eldest senior brother coughed heavily, then said in a low voice, Isn't that even better? Later on, when Cosmos God opens the Kangoo platform, we'll try our best to snatch the futons that are closest to the front. When he said this, they became excited. Listening to the Tao under the command of Cosmos God was equivalent to giving each of them an entrance ticket to break through to the Supreme Realm. The female disciple was the only one who scratched her head in confusion. In the center of the shattered Rodu star field, 3 figures stood in front of the spring of chaos that Old Master had sealed with a wave of his hand. Lu Ding, who was still dressed in a white Confucian robe, stood at the forefront, and behind him stood Lu Ting and Lu Gong. Lu Ding, who was as imposing as before, was surrounded by a terrifying ancestor realm aura. He frowned and looked at the spring of chaos that had been sealed by the black water without saying a word. After an unknown period of time, he asked in a deep voice, How many cultivators have arrived from the outside world? Hearing this, Lu Ting and Lu Gong looked at each other, then stepped forward and said, Big brother, there are nearly 3 million cultivators who have arrived at the Kangoo platform. They are all at the ultimate ruler realm. As for the Supreme Realm experts, there are less than tens of thousands. Bastard! A bunch of damn things! Lu Ding roared in anger, and a dark aura that did not match his previous temperament surged from his eyes. I have so humbly begged them to come, but they actually don't know how to appreciate favors. Suppressing his anger and hatred, Lu Ding's eyes grew darker. Turning around, the darkness in his eyes had completely disappeared and was replaced by magnanimity and kindness. When Lu Ting and Lu Gong heard this, they immediately said, "Big brother, if you have anything to say, just tell us directly. The three of US brothers will not distinguish between each other." Lu Ding nodded heavily and said, "In that case, I'll have to ask all of you to come out this time. Please invite the Divine Life Palace, the Dragon and Phoenix clans, and all the Supremes and half-ancestors to the Kangoo platform. I want to make it up to them. After all, I was in the wrong this time. Don't worry, big brother. No matter what, the two of us will definitely invite them over to show the sincerity of our Qilin clan." Lu Ting said firmly, "There's no time to lose. We will definitely invite them over before you start preaching the Tao for people to gain enlightenment." After that, the two of them left. Looking at the disappearing figure, a dark expression appeared in Lu Ding's eyes again, which was extremely inconsistent with his ancestor realm identity. The entire shattered Rodu star field was still in its original state. Looking at the spring of chaos beneath his feet, Lu Ding turned his gaze to his left arm. The next moment, he suddenly raised his right hand, and with his fingers like a knife, he directly cut off his entire left arm from his shoulder blade. Ah! With a muffled groan of pain, Lu Ding's right hand caught a complete arm. Supreme divine blood gushed out from the broken part, but Lu Ding did not care at all. He let the divine blood stain his clothes, looking like a terrifying demonic god. Looking at the arm that was still trembling in his hand, Lu Ding's eyes were filled with hatred. "Damn you, Jian Wushuang. You were the perfect host that I was going to latch on to, but you disappeared without a trace. That's why I went through so much trouble. If you appear in front of me again, I'll definitely cut you into pieces." The divine blood gradually dissipated, and at the same time, his broken left arm grew back. Lu Ding was as calm and composed as before, and he looked majestic. The severed arm had also changed its appearance at some point in time. It had turned into a flesh-colored small cauldron with intricate patterns carved on it. "I can't wait any longer. I'll let you all contribute some nutrients to my clay idol first." Lu Ding smiled gloomily. He suddenly opened his arms as if he was hugging someone and leaped into the void. The vast Kangoo platform, which had already been constructed into a towering hall, slowly opened its huge door at this moment. An extremely pure divine power gushed out, and all the cultivators who rushed to the Kangoo platform were bathed in this divine power. All the cultivators could feel that the shackles on them had loosened. Roar! A roar that reverberated through the ages resounded as a Qilin surging with pure yang energy descended. On the Kangoo platform, the solemn and majestic giant image of the ancestral Qilin form appeared. "To all the people of the divine power universe, I have inherited the heavenly Tao. In order to save the divine power universe from the disasters and to be qualified for the position of Cosmos God, I have opened a Tao Plaza today and opened the Tao listening praying mats to bestow upon you a great opportunity." As Lu Ding's majestic voice fell, the door of the Kangoo platform's giant hall was completely opened. "Everyone, please take your seats." All the cultivators were in a frenzy. They swarmed forward without a care for anything in order to snatch the futon closest to Cosmos God. The 10 people from the Taizong Shrine were at the back of the crowd. Each of them had an anxious look on their faces, afraid that they would not be able to get a futon. Only the female disciple, who was protected by her senior brothers, was a little confused. She did not know if it was an illusion or if her mind was in a trance, but she accidentally saw Cosmos God sitting on top of the Kangoo platform's giant hall. There was a hint of strangeness in the vast and sacred aura. Shaking her head slightly, the female disciple from the Taizong Shrine realized that Cosmos God was looking down at them and hurriedly lowered her head. "Eldest senior brother, second senior brother, why don't we turn back now?" After hesitating for a while, the female disciple gritted her teeth and said. When the eldest senior brother heard this, he immediately became anxious. "I say, Zhou Ling, what are you doing now? Do you know how hard it is to get an entrance ticket? You're making a joke out of your Tao path." The female disciple named Zhou Ling gritted her teeth. In the next moment, she suddenly turned around and squeezed through the crowd, leaving the Kangoo platform. "Junior sister, come back!" The eldest senior brother and the others shouted anxiously, but seeing that she had already made up her mind, they could only stop in regret. In the crowd of cultivators, Jiuling turned back to look at them, and then left resolutely. I hope that all of this is just my wild guess. Close to 3.5 million cultivators all surged into the Kangoo platform. Every piece of unknown spiritual jade beneath their feet exuded a vast amount of divine power. As the cultivators walked into it, they could feel their bodies being nourished by some kind of mysterious energy. The entire Kangoo platform's giant hall was like a boundless star field with countless ancient stars above it, looking extremely profound. In the vast hall of the vast Kangoo platform, where the clouds were misty, tens of thousands of lotus platforms were shining on each other. In the center of the largest lotus platform sat Lu Ding, dressed in a flowing cloud scholar's robe. The great Tao of heaven and earth appeared behind him like a rainbow, with auspicious sounds and precious light flowing. All the cultivators felt a suppression from the great Tao of heaven and earth in their hearts. Then, a total of 3.5 million cultivators knelt down at the same time and called out devoutly. With a smile on his face, Lu Ding waved his sleeve, and the supreme divine power turned into thousands of rainbow shadows, sweeping into the bodies of every cultivator. At this moment, all the cultivators felt that the elusive shackles were opened, as if the floodgates had opened and they were rising. Rays of supreme realm cultivation light shot up into the sky, illuminating the inside of the Kangoo platform as if it were daytime. While these cultivators were breaking through their cultivation realms, a shadow flashed across Lu Ding's eyes. The next moment, a palm-sized flesh-colored cauldron was taken out of his sleeve. The flesh-colored furnace expanded in the wind and grew to a size of tens of millions of miles in the blink of an eye. All the cultivators subconsciously looked over. At this moment, regardless of whether it was near or far, more than half of the stars began to rush towards the Kangoo platform and fall into the flesh-colored cauldron. A bright and strange light began to rise from the furnace, turning into a cloud of smoke that rose to the ground. All the cultivators felt as if they were in a fairyland, and they had unknowingly lost their way. Just like that, nearly 3.5 million cultivators floated into the air and then fell into the abyss-like flesh-colored cauldron. In an instant, the world changed dramatically. With the entire Kangoo platform as the center, the wind and clouds suddenly changed. Almost 50,000 star fields around the Rodu star field were destroyed by this strange change, and the heavens and earth were crying. Lu Ding sat on the lotus throne, still looking at the scene with a kind face. A wisp of power that was not divine power but far stronger than divine power rose around him. The flesh-colored cauldron, which contained millions of cultivators and countless stars, kept shaking. At the same time, wisps of blood-red patterns began filling up the grooves of the cauldron. There were no screams, no wails. Everything seemed to be immersed in a fairyland, until the last moment of death. When the flesh-colored cauldron stopped shaking, all the phenomena in the world quieted down. Then, the flesh-colored cauldron slowly changed and finally transformed into a body without any facial features. Lu Ding waved his hand, and the strange body shrank and fell into his hand. "Next time, your facial features will grow out." Lu Ding grinned. "And it's time for me to break this invisible restraint." Heaven and earth trembled. Jiuling, who was already far away from the Kangoo platform, sensed the strange change and hurriedly fled. However, the invisible suction force was simply too terrifying. With her realm as an ultimate ruler, she could not even move an inch. At this critical moment, a Qilin's roar rang out. At the same time, a force of extreme yang pulled her body and saved her from the suction. In the vast cosmic boat, Lu Ting looked at Jiuling. "Miss, the Tao field is already closed. You haven't entered yet, have you?" Jiuling did not to speak anymore. She looked at the thousands of Qilin clan people in the cosmic boat in fear. "You're not thinking of us as bad people, are you? We're all the relatives of the cosmos god." "We're not bad people," Lu Gong laughed and said. For some reason, he had a good impression of this woman whose eyes were filled with fear. However, Zhou only thanked him in a hurry and left the comisk boat as if she was escaping. "Second brother, you guys can go back first. I'll be back soon." After leaving these words, Lu Gong hurriedly followed Zhou footsteps. Lu Ting shook his head helplessly and returned to the Kanggu platform in the cosmic boat. "What is this place? Didn't I fall into the dark abyss? Did I not die?" A strange whimper and whisper came into his ears. A figure that was almost torn into two by the chaotic astral wind slowly woke up. The scabs formed by the divine blood all over his body were repeatedly torn by the astral wind in the space-time turbulence and could not heal. He had already become a bloodied man. Jian Wushuang's original appearance was almost unrecognizable. He was like a skeleton that had just grown flesh and blood. He looked at the grotesque and variegated space-time turbulence in a daze. "If I'm not dead, how am I supposed to go back?" He lifted his feet and walked through this unknown time and space like a walking corpse. He had lost count of how many years he had been walking. The most terrifying thing about the space-time turbulence was the unknown. There were no space-time coordinates here. There were only grotesque and variegated realms and astral winds that could easily tear one's body apart. However, Jian Wushuang had never given up. He was determined to move forward in the turbulence. He did not know how much time had passed. Just as he was completely numb, a faint light spot hidden in the turbulence appeared in his eyes. Jian Wushuang touched it without thinking. In an instant, tens of thousands of streams of light appeared, stirring up layers of ripples as if they were stirring the water. Then, the flowing light that burst out was like a dense net that directly absorbed Jian Wushuang's entire body. His mind and divine sense were spinning, and he didn't know how big the world was. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. A beam of light, like a shooting star in broad daylight, streaked across the sky in a white line and then fell heavily to the ground. Even if the ground was soft, it almost took Jian Wushuang's life. The meridians and bones of his entire body broke inch by inch the moment he landed on the ground. His true soul and divine soul, together with his brain, were almost thrown out. Jian Wushuang, who was nearly 100 meters underground and had created a crater within a 10-mile radius, was now lying on his back. It was almost impossible for him to even move his fingers. His root bone was almost crushed into powder and he was already paralyzed. Even swallowing was an extravagant hope. However, fortunately, his soul was still there and he had not stepped into the reincarnation stage. As long as his divine soul was not destroyed, even if he only had a strand of hair or a piece of skin left, he could regrow his divine body. At the same time, he began to sense that what filled his body was no longer divine power, but another law, another power. This kind of power that was not integrated into the body had far surpassed divine power. It was manifolds higher than divine power. He was completely shocked. What is this place? Did I not return to the divine power universe? Jian Wushuang wanted to check his surroundings, but the only thing he could do was to blink and close his eyes. With a helpless attitude, Jian Wushuang continued to lie down. Spring and autumn changed, and the new snow replaced the new spring. He had been counting days for 500,000 years. 500,000 years was a long time, but Jian Wushuang lay there like a rock for 500,000 years. As he was unable to absorb any power from the outside world, he could only rely on the divine power that was produced in his dantian to repair his broken body inch by inch. After 500,000 years, Jian Wushuang could finally move his body. However, because of his mistake, he had to lie down for another 100,000 years. Looking at the extremely abundant and powerful power that surpassed any power he had ever seen, Jian Wushuang, who did not believe it, tried to absorb a wisp of the vast and mysterious energy. Then he lay straight back in the pit. After learning a painful lesson, Jian Wushuang, who had completely recovered, climbed up from the pit and did not do anything similar again. For 600,000 years, Jian Wushuang could not help but sigh. It was a double torture to his body and soul. Feeling the divine power that had filled his body to the extreme, he decided to find a way to leave this place. He tried to use his vast divine power to tear the space apart, but his divine power, which was comparable to an ancestor realm expert's, could not even leave a white mark when it streaked across the space. Jian Wushuang had no choice but to give up. After walking out of the boundary filled with giant trees, Jian Wushuang finally realized what was strange. There was not a single living being's aura here, not even the clear cry of birds. Could it be that this place is a dead zone? Jian Wushuang thought as he leaped into the sky. Just as he leaped up, a sense of life and death crisis made him subconsciously look down. In the middle of the dense forest, a purple tail as huge as a sky-wallowing python whipped toward him. Jian Wushuang had no time to dodge at all, and he was directly whipped down from the sky. He only stopped after breaking hundreds of towering trees with his body. He felt as if his body had been scattered. Rumble, rumble. The earth trembled, and the towering trees parted in two rows. A strange, pitch-black beast with a dark purple tail slowly walked out of the darkness. It had 6 thick canine teeth, and its mouth was like a bloody abyss. The giant claw tore the space apart and quickly came for Jian Wushuang. The explosion of that extremely terrifying aura made him lose all desire to fight and directly jumped away from this attack. After dodging the attack, Jian Wushuang did not even have time to catch his breath. A dark purple tail whipped him and he was smashed to the ground again. The strange giant beast arrived in front of Jian Wushuang at a speed that did not match its body shape. It opened its huge bloody mouth and swallowed him directly. He did not want to save his strength anymore, so he used the ancestral skill. The radiance of the Transcendence Heavenly Gate surged and a giant finger appeared around Jian Wushuang. Then it stabbed into the mouth of the giant beast. The attack, which was at the peak of the divine power universe, tore the corner of the giant beast's mouth apart, and 3 of its 6 mountain-like teeth were broken. The giant beast retreated in pain and then went completely crazy. It opened its mouth and tried to shovel Jian Wushuang. Seeing that even the ancestral skill could not kill it, Jian Wushuang did not dare to fight to the death. He immediately fled madly. Just like that, a beast chased a man in this huge forest. Just as Jian Wushuang was prepared for the worst, the giant beast behind him suddenly let out a miserable howl and fell to the ground like a collapsing mountain. Jian Wushuang turned around with lingering fear and saw that the giant beast was being held back by something and twitching. A wail came from the beast's mouth, and it looked at him with pleading eyes. Is this guy trying to lure me into his trap? Jian Wushuang started to doubt. Just as he was about to turn around and leave this place of trouble, the giant beast actually spoke human language and interrupted. Save me. After thinking for a while, Jian Wushuang cautiously moved forward. When he was closer, he saw that there was a thick chain tied to the neck of the giant beast. The chain was deeply embedded in its neck, and its head was almost cut off by its fervent running. At this moment, the giant beast was already on the verge of death and could not live. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang stopped in front of the mountain-like figure and looked at the chain that was deeply embedded in the bone. After a moment of hesitation, he drew the tarot design sword and cut the chain in half. The chains shattered, and the giant beast let out a wail before lying down quietly. Jian Wushuang did not intend to stay. When he was about to leave, he glanced at the ground from the corner of his eye. In the middle of the thick chain, a huge iron plate engraved with complex characters came into view. Jian Wushuang lifted the iron plate and saw the complicated words on it clearly. It was carved by someone and contained the power of rules and restrictions. The weak giant beast looked up at Jian Wushuang and gave a soft cry. Its eyes were full of fear and horror when it saw the iron plate. Jian Wushuang did not pay attention to the giant beast's actions. Instead, he fell into deep thought. The words on the metal plate should have been carved by a human hand, which meant that this place was definitely not a dead zone. Then what kind of place was this? What would the rules of the Great Tao be like? No one could answer. In the 600,000 years that Jian Wushuang had been here, the only living thing he had seen was this big fellow. In the vast forest, a mysterious giant beast with a pitch-black body and a purple tail was flying through the forest. On the back of this huge beast, a young man dressed like a ranger was lying on his back, sleeping soundly. The beast's soft fur was like mink fur, so Jian Wushuang had been sleeping on its back ever since he subdued it. Due to the unique characteristics of the giant beast, Jian Wushuang gave it a nice name, Az. For more than 10 years, the man and the beast never stopped, running toward the boundary of this realm. Originally, Jian Wushuang had wanted to learn more about this place from Az, but it could not give any useful information other than some simple thoughts. The vast forest was quickly left behind. The further they advanced, the more auras of various living beings gradually increased. On Az's flat and wide back, the drowsy Jian Wushuang suddenly felt a great danger. He suddenly sat up and saw a huge bird that almost covered the sun flying at a low altitude above the sun. Its pair of eyes, which were surging with green light, locked onto Jian Wushuang almost instantly. The aura of facing death almost made Jian Wushuang shiver. He slapped Az's big head and said, "Run, Az! Run for your life!" Az's claws dug into the ground and suddenly swept out, like an arrow released from a bow, instantly sweeping thousands of miles away. However, the huge green bird that covered the sky was even more terrifying. Caught up with Az almost at the same time. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to pull out the tarot divine sword, the humongous green bird transformed into a graceful figure and fell behind Jian Wushuang. A slender hand pressed Jian Wushuang's palm, and the tarot divine sword was pushed back into the scabbard. "Don't look back. Run." A weak voice rang in Jian Wushuang's ears, and then there was no more sound. Jian Wushuang was stunned and subconsciously looked back. A blue-haired, beautiful woman in a blue robe and a long dress hugged him tightly from behind. She had already passed out. Jian Wushuang looked down and saw a palm-sized wound on the chest of the lady in green. Divine blood was flowing out. After barely recovering from the shock, Jian Wushuang hesitated about whether to throw the woman of unknown origin down. She was obviously being hunted down. After thinking for a while, Jian Wushuang sighed and did not make up his mind. He held the lady in green in front of him and pressed his palm against his back, transferring his divine power to her. As expected, the meridians of the lady in green that contained that kind of energy also rejected the divine power. However, her body did not reject the divine power and was recovering rapidly. After smelling the restless aura, Az became even more irritable and fled even faster. However, the next moment, a deep and sinister voice resounded in the surroundings. "The bastard's running ahead. If you don't stop, I'll blast you all into pieces." "Oh no!" Jian Wushuang cursed in his heart and directly pushed the woman in green in his arms forward. Az understood his meaning and rolled her into her mouth with a tilt of its head. After doing all this, Jian Wushuang pulled Az and stopped. Nearly 6 figures exuding boundless energy surrounded them from all directions. They all wore loose black robes with golden patterns on the cuffs. With just one glance, Jian Wushuang's pupils suddenly contracted. The 6 guys who did not seem to have high status actually had the strength of half-ancestor realm. The 6 figures surrounding Jian Wushuang were not in a hurry to kill him. Instead, they sized him up with a sense of judgment. "Which sect are you from? Why are you traveling alone in this desolate land?" One of the older men stepped forward and asked in a deep voice. Jian Wushuang had already prepared a script in his mind. He pretended to be timid and said, "I am from the mountains. I have no sect. I was born and raised in the desolate wildlands and have never left this place." The elder looked at Jian Wushuang again and said, "Since you have never left this place, let me ask you, have you ever seen a green luan?" Jian Wushuang immediately understood that the green luan he was talking about should be the green-robed lady who had passed out. "I've never seen one before. If there's any news, I'll definitely report it to you, my lords," Jian Wushuang said in fear. The elderly man obviously did not want to stay here any longer. But just as he was about to leave, a strong man behind him whispered, "Second brother, we can't complete the mission without the green luan. Why don't we?" At this point, they all looked at Jian Wushuang and Az. "Forget it. This brat is unlucky. I'll capture them to make up the numbers," the elder ordered, and a total of 3 streaks of energy formed and shot straight toward the ground. Jian Wushuang's eyes turned cold. He waved his hand and several vast sword intents clashed with the 3 streaks of energy. How could a half-ancestor be able to resist a sword intent divine power that could contend with an ancestor realm expert? The vast sword intent easily shattered the silk and then directly killed the 3 people closest to it without losing momentum. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. By the time the elder reacted, a figure with a cold aura of death had already arrived behind him. No, if you kill me, you'll be offending the entire. Without waiting for him to finish, Jian Wushuang directly cut off his neck with his palm. The remaining 2 guys, whose legs were shaking like screaming chaff, were also killed by Jian Wushuang. From the beginning to the end, 6 half-ancestors were all killed in less than 10 breaths. As soon as he landed on the ground, Jian Wushuang saw that the woman in green, who was hidden in Azi's mouth, was sitting on Azi's head and looking at him with interest. She did not look injured at all. Seeing Jian Wushuang, the lady in green jumped down from Azi's head, raised her eyebrows, and said with a smile, "I didn't know you were so strong." Jian Wushuang glanced at her from the corner of his eyes. Obviously, he did not have a good impression of her, so he immediately left. The green-robed lady was taken aback, and then she hurriedly said, "Hey, I haven't thanked you yet. Go away, demoness." Jian Wushuang said coldly. The green-robed woman was immediately flustered. "You brat, you actually dare to call me a demoness? I will make you pay for this." With that, a few green powers flew out of her sleeves and headed straight for Jian Wushuang. "You're too noisy." He waved his hand and shot out a ray of divine power, instantly shattering the green power. The entire forest was shaking. When the emerald green power was offset, the lady in green was extremely shocked. "Who are you?" After taking a deep breath, the lady in green transformed into a pair of green wings and flew to Jian Wushuang's side. "A passerby." Jian Wushuang was concise and comprehensive. It was obvious that he did not want to get entangled with her. Obviously, the woman in green did not realize this. She immediately sat on Azi's back. The curiosity in her eyes grew as she looked at Jian Wushuang. "A passerby? I've never seen anyone use the kind of energy you just used. It's really mysterious." Ignoring her words, Jian Wushuang looked at the same chain and token on her neck that was exactly the same as Azi. Sensing Jian Wushuang's gaze, the lady in green hurriedly hugged herself and said, "You're despicable." His face was full of black lines, but he could only say patiently, "I'm looking at that iron plate." The green-robed woman smiled awkwardly and then grabbed the metal plate on her neck. "You're talking about this? It's the plate used to bind and record the number. It's all thanks to that bastard." Without saying anything else, Jian Wushuang pulled out the tarot divine sword, picked up the iron token, and easily cut off the iron chain. The green-robed lady's eyes widened in disbelief as she looked at the metal medallion that had been broken into 2. How is this possible? Even I can't break this metal plate. Just because you can't do it doesn't mean others can't. All right, you can leave now. I'm ready to leave too, Jian Wushuang said indifferently. My name is Qingluan. The lady in green nodded. Thank you for saving me. I will definitely repay you in the future. Jian Wushuang waved his hand and said, Let's not talk about that. Let me ask you, do you know any way to leave this universe? So there really are other universes apart from this one, the woman named Qingluan said in surprise. Jian Wushuang was speechless. Do you have any way to leave? I've been here long enough. Qingluan stopped talking, as if she had made a decision. Finally, she nodded and said, I can, but with my ability, I can only tear a gap at most. Jian Wushuang did not have any hope. He immediately nodded and said, That's enough. That's enough. Qingluan nodded. Then, take me to the place where you first came from. Unable to contain his excitement, Jian Wushuang immediately led Qingluan and directed Azi to gallop back to the place where he first came from. Jian Wushuang was eager to return to the divine power universe. 600,000 years was probably enough to wipe out the memories of most people. All he could do was seize the slightest opportunity and return to the divine power universe. More than 10 years later, the 2 humans and 1 beast arrived at their original location. Looking at the crater that had become a huge lake, Jian Wushuang sighed with emotion. Who would have thought that he had come to an unknown universe and lay there for 600,000 years? Did you first enter from here? Qinghuan asked. At the same time, wisps of strange green energy surged around her body. Jian Wushuang nodded and pointed at a direction with great precision. To be honest, I'm afraid you'll be the first and last person to break into the Great Yen domain on your own. I can't imagine it. Qing Yuan shrugged. Anyway, I wish you good luck. Great Yen domain? It sounds a little weird, Jian Wushuang thought to himself. The next moment, Qinghuan let out a long cry, and her entire body turned into a sky-covering green bird that soared into the sky. She pecked at the void with her emerald-green beak, and ripples appeared in the void. Then, a crack the size of a needle appeared. The Qinghuan tore it apart with all her might, and the crack immediately expanded to an inch long. Now! Qinghuan cried. Jian Wushuang patted Azi's big head and then leaped toward the crack. The violent aura of the space-time turbulence emerged again. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and cupped his hands at Qinghuan. Thank you for your help. We don't owe each other anything now. Qinghuan, who had returned to her human form, smiled faintly. All right, we don't owe each other anything. If you can, send Azi to a more desolate place. Don't let it be caught again, Jian Wushuang added, and then strode into the space-time turbulence. Wait a moment, Qinghuan suddenly called out to him. Will we meet again in the future? I'm afraid we won't have the chance to meet again. After taking one last look at Qinghuan, Jian Wushuang waved his hand and disappeared into the space-time turbulence. Looking at the sealed space-time crack, Qing Yuan stood there in a daze. She only left after a long time. This ancient and desolate savage land had returned to peace. If it was not for the fact that a young ranger had accidentally entered this place for 600,000 years, it would probably have remained silent. As soon as Jian Wushuang stepped into the space-time turbulence, the turbulent astral wind that could even cut the divine soul attacked him again. To Jian Wushuang's surprise, although the chaotic astral wind was as terrifying as before, it did not hurt him as much as before. This change made him extremely excited. At least, he did not have to worry about dying in this space-time turbulence all of a sudden. As he watched the tiny light spot behind him disappear, Jian Wushuang leaped into the turbulence and searched for the aura of the divine power universe carefully. As he continued to search, a faint and familiar aura came from an unknown direction. It was like a coordinate that guided Jian Wushuang forward. It was that aura that allowed Jian Wushuang to change his route and move forward with difficulty in the space-time turbulence. It was unknown how many years they had been traveling in the turbulent flow, but that incomparably intimate aura had also become more and more intense. When Jian Wushuang suddenly crossed a turbulence, a figure sitting in space-time appeared in front of him. See Cosmic God. Jian Wushuang was completely shocked. Looking at the figure sitting there, he could not think. Cosmic God, who had sealed Void God in the space-time turbulence with his own body, slowly opened his eyes. It was as though 1,000,000,000 years had passed. Cosmos God smiled. Little friend Wushuang, we meet again. Jian Wushuang's eyes turned red and he charged at Cosmos God. In his eyes, that kind elder had already gone through too much. Little friend, get up quickly. This old man can't endure this bow of yours. Cosmos God helped Jian Wushuang up and smiled. You're already the master of the rules of the heaven and earth. I can't be worthy of your bow anymore. A teacher for a day, a teacher for life. It is also a rule for a disciple to bow to a teacher, Jian Wushuang said. He knelt on one knee and bowed solemnly to Cosmos God. Cosmos God's eyes were filled with relief and heartache as he helped Jian Wushuang up. You've matured, Cosmos God said emotionally. You've already grown from a young friend who listened to the Tao in the Cloud Palace to a true Cosmos God. Jian Wushuang laughed bitterly. The world has changed. I've been away for over 500,000 years. I don't know what will happen to the divine power universe in the meantime. Upon hearing this, Cosmos God smiled. There's no need to worry. The laws of the great Tao are different. The 500,000 years that you have experienced might not be as long in another universe. You can still make it in time. He nodded thoughtfully. It's still not too late. Go back. I'll show you the way. The divine power universe can't do without you. With a smile, Cosmos God extended his withered palm and pointed in a certain direction. Jian Wushuang said anxiously, Teacher, now that I have seen you in the space-time turbulence, how can you not return with me? The divine power universe needs you. Cosmos God shook his head slowly. I can't go back anymore. My life source has already dried up. If I hadn't been waiting for your arrival here, I would have died long ago. As if to confirm his words, the figure of Cosmos God started to dim rapidly. He started to shatter from the bottom of his feet, just like countless stars scattering. Jian Wushuang was shocked. He quickly released his divine power in an attempt to stabilize Cosmos God's body. However, it was of no use. The last thing I can do is to send you back to the divine power universe. Cosmos God smiled and nodded. At the same time, he pushed Jian Wushuang away gently. Jian Wushuang's eyes were bloodshot. He looked at Cosmos God, who had already disappeared into the space-time turbulence, and knew that he could no longer go back. Countless tiny rays of light gathered to form a river that extended into the distance. After adjusting his dejected state of mind, Jian Wushuang leaped and ran into the distance. The silver river formed by Cosmos God's body finally stopped before a vortex before it dissipated completely. Without any hesitation, Jian Wushuang stepped into the vortex. Countless rays of light rose and turned into thousands of ribbons. He only felt an indescribable, invisible restraint pressing down on his body. Then he had an epiphany. That was the heavenly Tao law that belonged to the entire divine power universe. Even if he reached the ancestor realm, he could not defy it. The darkness before his eyes instantly cleared up. In the blue starry sky, a figure dressed in a black ranger's outfit stood in the distance. The surging divine power completely replenished his almost dried-up meridians, and the divine power derived from nearly 100 star fields was supplied to him. Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes. The rules of great Tao flowed around him, and the lightning snake floated above his head like a divine punishment. He looked extremely majestic. He was worried that everything had changed. After standing still for a long time, Jian Wushuang decided to face it. As he traveled through the deserted star area, Jian Wushuang soon felt that something was wrong. There was not a single trace of life in the nearly 10,000 star fields and divine kingdoms. One had to know that even the star fields in the extreme north of the universe had been explored. However, how could there be no sex living in this star field with abundant divine power and no bad turbulence? Could it be that, in the years that he was gone, a tremendous change had already happened? With doubts in his mind, Jian Wushuang flew across the starry sky. He wanted to rush to the extraterritorial battlefield to see his old friends and the unfinished business. Finally, after crossing hundreds of millions of star areas, Jian Wushuang felt a star-field divine kingdom with the aura of living beings. He was close to a relatively prosperous and vast star field. It was filled with divine power and good luck, which was very suitable for cultivation. Walking among the mountains, Jian Wushuang came to the biggest sect in the divine kingdom of the star field, the True Sword sect. There was some history between them. During the Battle of the Great Catastrophe War, the True Sword sect sent out 7 Supreme Realm experts. Their sect master, Elder Yuji, was a half-invincible supreme martial artist, and had a brief discussion with Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang went straight to the True Sword sect. However, he found it strange that there was not a single ultimate ruler realm expert among the hundreds of thousands of disciples in the divine kingdom. Who is it, and why are you here? A red-lipped, white-teethed boy holding a sword walked out from behind the mountain gate and asked Jian Wushuang curiously, I'm a disciple of the Divine Life Palace, and an old friend of your sect master. I'm here to ask about some things. Jian Wushuang cupped his hands and said. The sword-wielding boy's eyes flashed with a touch of sadness. Then he raised his head and said, Senior, please go back. My sect master died in the off-world battlefield 200 years ago. 6 elders also died with him. Jian Wushuang was stunned. He sighed in his heart and finally said, I see that your sect has almost no disciples at the ultimate ruler realm. Why is that? The sword-wielding boy continued. The new cosmos god has ascended and is calling for the entire universe. All ultimate rulers are to head to the Kangoo platform and sit on praying mats to listen to his teachings. The remaining 100 or so ruler realm senior brothers in my clan have already rushed there to listen to his teachings. When Jian Wushuang heard this, he was stunned for a moment. But he soon understood. During the period of time that he had disappeared, Lu Ding had claimed the position of the new cosmos god. Jian Wushuang had no objection to this. After all, the divine power universe could not go a day without a master. Lu Ding was a generous, kind person and had the demeanor of a lord. He was far more suitable to be cosmos god than Jian Wushuang. At the same time, opening up the Kangoo platform's prayer mats was a great act of kindness after the battle of the Great Catastrophe. In addition, I would like to ask you one more thing. How many years has it been since the last Great Catastrophe? He asked, feeling a little apprehensive. About 200 years, the sword-wielding boy said after some thought. Jian Wushuang nodded with a smile. In that case, I won't bother you anymore. The boy holding the sword lowered his head and smiled. He took 2 steps back and stopped. Then, he turned around to face the entire True Sword sect and sprinkled down a layer of vast divine power halo. The sword-wielding boy felt warm all over his body. Then, the layers of shackles in his body were broken, and his divine power rose crazily like bamboo shoots after a rain. A pillar of red light rose up and dyed the space around him a dozen miles. Everything was shrouded in a hazy divine power. This red-lipped and white-teethed sword-wielding boy had shed his mortal body and entered the supreme realm. With a plop, he fell to the ground in a daze, then stood up and looked into the distance. In the misty clouds, there was no trace of the newcomer. Above the starry sky, Jian Wushuang looked back at the True Sword sect and then smiled helplessly. I'm already at the ancestor realm, huh? He had slept for 600,000 years under the vast universe and reached the ancestor realm when he returned to the divine power universe. This time, he really became an ancestor while lying down. Only 200 years had passed, so there was still time. The clouds and smoke were ethereal, and divine power was vast. At this moment, only a flesh-colored cauldron remained on the Kangoo platform that was situated above the entire Rodu. Behind the furnace, there were thousands of lotus peaks. In the center of the lotus peak, Lu Ding was as warm and gentle as it had been 200 years ago. However, what was surging around him was no longer a vast divine power, but an unknown power and aura. He looked even more unfathomable. In this huge hall of the Kangoo platform, the cauldrons were filled with spiritual movement and exuberant vitality. For the second time, almost all the last flames in the universe was gathered. A total of 5 million cultivators were thrown into the strange flesh-colored cauldron. Each and every cultivator's voice and appearance could be seen in the rising clouds and smoke. In the 200 years since then, close to 10 million cultivators had died in the flesh-colored furnace. Looking at the cloud and smoke rising from the furnace, a sinister smile emerged on Lu Ding's face. The furnace slowly transformed, and in the blink of an eye, it turned into a pure white body. On the head of the body, a strange face that resembled both men and women slowly grew. Lu Ding waved his hand and his physical body floated in front of him. He stood up slowly and walked around the body, admiring it. Then, he cut open the abdomen with his finger. Dark red blood that was filled with vast divine power gushed out. That strange body had surpassed the half-ancestor level, and it was only 1 step away from the ancestor level. Just one last step, you'll have your heart. With a wave of his hand, he closed the hollow abdomen and put on a long Confucian robe over the body. At first glance, he actually looked 70 to 80% similar to Lu Ding. At the same time, the main door of the Kangoo platform's giant hall slowly opened, and a somewhat haggard-looking Lu Ting strolled into the hall. He raised his head and glanced at Lu Ding and the strange body, then lowered his head again. How is it? Haven't any of them arrived yet? Lu Ding said in a deep voice, his eyes unable to hide his anger. Lu Ting shook his head. I haven't received any reply from any sect so far. I'm afraid. Lu Ding did not say anything more. He closed his eyes and pondered. A moment later he said, "Spread the news that I already know about Jian Wushuang. At the same time, tell them that the spring of chaos in Rodu is fluctuating abnormally." "What's wrong?" Taking in a deep breath, Lu Ting said, "In recent years, there have been some bad rumors from the Great Void Temple. They say that you are using the excuse of passing along teachings of the Great Tao to attract countless cultivators to die in order to cultivate your evil path." Lu Ding was expressionless as he said, "It's been 200 years. It's time for me to go out and take a walk. Second brother, continue to do as I say. I'll personally make a trip to the Great Void Temple to retrieve an item." Lu Ting nodded and quickly ran out of the giant hall. A moment later, Lu Ding and the strange body behind him disappeared as well. "What? There's news of Jian Wushuang." In the red sky star field, Feng Qi jumped up from the fiery throne, staring at the messenger of the Qilin clan. "Are you telling the truth?" The envoy from the Qilin race had a pale expression. Without any hesitation, he nodded his head. Cosmos God said so himself. At the same time, the spring of chaos in Rodu has also begun to fluctuate. After asking the envoy some more questions, Feng Qi immediately rushed to the Kangoo platform. "Matriarch." Feng Xiao hesitated. "Aren't you worried that this news is fake?" Feng Qi was startled, but then she said firmly, "If he dares to lie to me, I'll skin him alive even if I die." Seeing Feng Qi walk out of the Crimson Sky Hall first, Feng Xiao gritted his teeth and directly led more than 1,000 supreme martial artists to follow her and head to the Kangoo platform. At the same time, the Dragon Clan, which had its heavenly gate tightly shut, was also opened, with a group led by Long Yen and Long Qi to the Kangoo platform. In the dark hall, the sun never shone in. In a place where the light could barely be seen, a figure dressed in black and gold was sitting quietly. Behind this figure, there were nearly 100 other figures. "I told you to leave. Why didn't you leave?" Great Void Divine Emperor opened his eyes slowly and said calmly. An elder holding a staff took a step forward and cupped his hands. "Your Highness, all the disciples of the Great Void Temple should leave. Those who should die are already dead. The remaining old guys will accompany your Highness for the last time. Since that's the case, let's walk the final path together." Emperor God Taishu stood up slowly and looked at the figures. "But before that, you have to help me do one last thing. Warn the Dragon Clan and Phoenix Clan, as well as the Divine Palace of Life, not to go to the Kangoo platform." "Yes." The old man cupped his hands in acknowledgement and then disappeared into the sky with nearly 100 figures. Looking at the empty hall, Great Void Divine Emperor left and stood outside the Great Void Temple. For 7 consecutive days, it was only when the clouds in the sky had darkened and a giant face that was changing the Great Tao fell that Great Void Divine Emperor opened his eyes slowly. The clouds collapsed, and the moon and stars shattered. A figure that seemed to have inherited the heavenly Tao appeared under the giant face. Immense divine power interweaved with the rules of Great Tao. The moment Lu Ding appeared, Great Void Divine Emperor realized that he was suppressed to the point where he could not move at all. With the arrival of Lu Ding, his unabashed ancestor realm aura could almost wipe out an entire dimension with ease. Behind him stood a strange-looking figure. Looking at this existence that was already at the peak of cultivation, Great Void Divine Emperor's expression remained extremely calm. "Aren't you afraid that Jian Wushuang will come back and settle the score with you in the future?" Lu Ding walked towards him slowly, a dark look growing in his eyes. "Jian Wushuang? Who the hell was he?" "I'm the savior of the entire divine power universe. Instead of thanking me, you're all avoiding me." Great Void Divine Emperor laughed coldly. "Savior? Don't you think that it's very shameless to say that?" Lu Ding was not angry. He just said coldly, "Say what you want to say. I'll send you on your way myself later. Do you know what I regret the most? I just didn't let Jian Wushuang kill you in the last battle." Great Void Divine Emperor said calmly. "None of them realized it except for me. Although you are from the divine power universe, the energy that is mixed in the divine power you use is the same as devouring Emperor of the Void Universe. Hearing this, Lu Ding chuckled. You're smart indeed, but it's too late. After saying that, Lu Ding extended his palm and clenched it in the air. The power of the rules of the Great Tao crushed Great Void Divine Emperor's heart directly. His chest caved in, and even the essence of the Invincible Supreme was instantly shattered. The destruction of the life source meant that there was no turning back. A stream of divine blood flowed out from the corner of Great Void Divine Emperor's mouth, and his face turned red. You will regret everything you have done. You won't even have the chance to redeem yourself, he said slowly. Lu Ding felt both disgust and fear towards this man, who was merely an invincible supreme, yet had never shown the slightest fear towards him from the beginning. Just as Lu Ding was about to consume him, an extremely sharp spear directly stabbed into the strange body like a flash of lightning. Countless shrill screams rang out, and a vast amount of blood qi gushed out. Great Void Divine Emperor's tensed face finally broke out in laughter. The spear that had accompanied him in his battle for the eternal chaos cycles helped him get the final laugh in the end. Lu Ding could not remain calm any longer, and he crushed Great Void Divine Emperor into powder. After that, he used his divine power to seal the crack on the chest of his corporeal body. Damn bastards! All of you can go to hell! Lu Ding was furious. He waved his hand and suppressed the entire star field, turning it into dust. An invincible supreme of a generation, Great Void Divine Emperor, died just like that. He, who had participated in several great catastrophes and did not die in the off-world battlefields, eventually died in the hands of the new cosmos god. The star domain collapsed, and the planes that had existed for countless chaos cycles finally vanished. Lu Ding's figure disappeared. He could not wait to rush to the Kangoo platform. There must have been hundreds of thousands of supreme martial artists gathered there, as well as several half-ancestors. After hearing that Jian Wushuang could possibly return from the Spring of Chaos, over 100,000 supreme itinerant cultivators from all the star fields in the Divine Power universe gathered here after several years. Led by the Dragon Clan and the Phoenix Clan, all the supreme powerhouses who had participated in the last battle of the Great Catastrophe were gathered in front of the Kangoo platform. Their faces were no longer filled with the silence they had when they first entered the off-world battlefield, but with excitement and anticipation. In just a short 200 to 300 years, many supreme martial artists who had yet to recover from their injuries had all come. Not for anything else, but to hear some news about that person. Feng Qi and the two half-ancestors of the Dragon Clan stood at the forefront of the army, in front of the Kangoo platform. No one came close. Do you think he really has any news about Jian Wushuang? Feng Qi looked at Long Yen and Long Qi with a frown. Then why are you here? Feng Qi asked, puzzled. We have to take a gamble, and I have a feeling that Master Wushuang is about to return, Long Yen said. Feng Qi curled her lips. Then why do you think that no one from the Divine Life Palace came? Long Yen said, They have their own concerns. Perhaps they will arrive soon. Just as they were speaking, the doors of the Kangoo platform's giant hall opened. The giant figure of the ancestral Qilin form, which stretched for thousands of miles, gradually floated up into the sky, showing its ancestor realm power. Even Supremes felt a strong sense of worship. You guys are here. The giant ancestral form opened its mouth and said kindly. At this moment, even Feng Qi, who was extremely repulsed by Lu Ding, could not find any fault with him. I've already gotten some information about Palace Master Wushuang of the Divine Life Palace. Please come to the Kangoo platform and find out what's going on, Lu Ding said as he extended his hand. Feng Qi, Long Yen, and Long Qi looked at each other and then said loudly, Cosmos God, there is no need for us to disturb you in the Kangoo platform. We are all in a hurry. Please tell us about Jian Wushuang so that we can be mentally prepared. As soon as these words were spoken, more than 100,000 supreme experts echoed in unison. It was obvious that no one had any intention of entering the Kangoo platform. Lu Ding's giant form still looked peaceful. I'm not too sure when Palace Master Wushuang will return, but recently, I felt Palace Master Wushuang's aura overflow from the Spring of Chaos. So I'm sure that Palace Master Wushuang will return from the Spring of Chaos in the future. But even I can't break the seal on the spring of chaos. That's why I want to work together with all of you to break the seal and wait for Palace Master Wushuang's return. Hundreds of thousands of supreme experts were shaken at this moment. Only Feng Qi, who had participated in that battle, frowned. As the extreme point of the divine power universe, there was a high possibility that Jian Wushuang would come from the spring of chaos if he returned. However, the seal was personally sealed by Old Master, and even Lu Ding himself could not break it. Could it be broken by gathering the power of more than 100,000 supreme experts? She always felt that Lu Ding's purpose was not that simple, but she could not refute it at the moment. Let's give it a try. Otherwise, there's no point in us gathering here, Long Yen said in a low voice. Feng Qi did not say much. After looking around, she immediately walked into the giant hall of the Kangoo platform. Looking at the hundreds of thousands of high-level supreme experts rushing in, the giant Qilin form remained calm and peaceful, but its lifeless eyes were full of greed. The more, the better. This way, my clay idol will fade faster. Feeling the warm energy coming from the jade brick under her feet, Feng Qi's vigilance gradually faded. It's best to be careful. Previously, the emissary from the Great Void Temple said that none of the cultivators who came to the Kangoo platform returned. They have all disappeared. Long Yen was beside her, using a secret voice transmission that only the two of them could hear. Feng Qi replied, I've also heard about it. Instead of letting him come to our door, I'd rather see what he's up to. Anyway, we must be careful. Palace Master Wushuang's whereabouts are unknown, and no one from the Divine Life Palace has come. We have to be careful, Long Yen said in a deep voice. Lu Ding, who had already materialized, led the way, guiding the crowd. The further they advanced, the more the ancient and resplendent walls around them shattered. Finally, the giant hall began to disappear. What replaced it was a broken star field. In the center of the broken star field, there was a spring of chaos that gave off a dark blue light, rippling like a lake. This was the ruins of the Rodu star field that the Qilin race had once controlled. Lu Ding leaped forward and then stood on the spring of the chaos. 10,000 rays of Yang divine power flickered around him. Everyone, please lend me a hand and open the seal together. With that, the immense Yang divine power transformed into the precious image of a Qilin and crashed into the spring of chaos. Hundreds of thousands of supreme experts also released their vast divine power at this moment. A power that was enough to destroy the world exploded above the spring of chaos. The indescribable explosion instantly tore through the imprisonment barrier. Countless strange energies gushed out like a river flowing backward. At this moment, the entire billions of miles of space was shrouded in a strange aura that had never been seen before.